tell me it's over now. Does a hate inside of me like some kind of master? I try to save you but I can't find the answer. I'm holding on to you, I'll never let go. I need you with me as I enter the shadows.
I was considering on uploading this video for my January schedule to kickstart 2026, but with many people really invested of the idea of discussing Loud House antagonists and villains, consider this as a Christmas gift, but it's still not the Christmas surprise that I'm still saving on Christmas Eve. If any of you guys didn't see my review of Naughty or Nice, I've expressed that Bad Santa was one of the most stupidest and idiotic villains that this show had made, and it really convinced me that whenever I look at the antagonists or villains in this franchise, some of which are good, but witnessing Bad Santa, it really gave me a different perspective of how badly this show is doing when it comes to villains. Granted, antagonists and villains are completely different, since villains do much more worse than antagonists, but after experiencing Bad Santa from Naughty or Nice, and thinking about the antagonists in the episodes from the seasons, honestly, they're not memorable, and they're mostly not bad, but at the same time, it really gave me the bigger picture that the Loud House is really incapable of making villains in comparison to the Fairly Odd Parents, Jimmy Neutron, Danny Phantom, and possibly SpongeBob. And I'm not talking about the main series, I'm also referring to the live action films and its spin-off, the Casagrandes. When I compared the episodes from the Loud House and the Casagrandes together back in 2023 and only did it 4 times in 2024, I really didn't have much to say about the villains, or antagonists in this case, because for me personally, they weren't much of an issue, and that was before No Time to Spy and Naughty or Nice came out. By that time, there were only 2 Loud House movies. The Loud House movie on Netflix from 2021 involving Morag, and the live-action Christmas movie, well, Lincoln is the antagonist, or anti-hero. As if I didn't had enough to say about Naughty or Nice, there's going to be a lot of comparisons involving Lincoln's character in the live-action film, and the fact that he was much more worse than how he was portrayed in Naughty or Nice. Just because the other film is live action doesn't automatically mean that the animated version is better. I looked past the great animation in Naughty or Nice, and regardless of how great it is, everything around it made it look bad. So we're gonna be focusing on the antagonists from seasons 1 through 9, and then we're heading straight to the movies. This is why the Loud House fails at antagonists and villains. Yes, I changed the title. It's a much more better title than the last title I had. The very first antagonist from this show came from the season 1 episode Out on a Limo, where we get the introduction of Lord Tetherby, who is so interested into Lincoln's limo that he manipulates him. Now, when I compared this episode to the Casagrandes episode from season 2, honestly, I did agree with him, but back then, it only showed to me that this episode really aged a lot more better compared to the later episodes of this show, judging of how that they actually made Lincoln's sisters in the white when they actually executed them in this episode. This element will factor on why the Lau family just feels a little sympathetic despite not deserving to get called. If you ignore all the bad things that they did, but that also leads to another problem. But I'm saving all that once we get to Naughty or Nice later in this video. Let's get back to the season 1 episode. You see, Lincoln made a promise to his sisters that after Loie agreed, along with her sisters, that Lincoln should have time with his limo, he would be willing to bring them all to Bob and Burger. Lincoln made a promise, and this really factors onto why that them bonding and then Lincoln goes behind their backs is considered him being selfish. And it's actually done correctly. You can say all you want, but for me personally, the Loud Sisters were never in the wrong in this episode whatsoever. This is also the first time, possibly, that Lincoln encounters a character whom he makes a terrible choice. And this does factor so much to his character as the series progressed, but at the same time, they actually knew how to execute it good, judging of how that Lincoln really likes to live in the witch life, which is literally leaving out his family, and not just his sisters. And considering that even though that the bad episodes really overweigh the positives of the Loud Sisters, in this episode they still aren't being portrayed as in the wrong, considering that they never forced Lincoln to bring them to Bob and Burger with his limo. So it always gave me the impression that with the other episodes just outweighing the goods of what the sisters have done, it's honestly one of the reasons why I've came to the conclusion onto why I agreed with Lord Timberby. But at the same time, back then, there was only one Loud House villain with antagonists that people just don't usually remember the most. I will say this though, if you don't remember Lord Timberby after watching this episode, upon binge watching the later seasons, I really don't blame you. But at the same time, what makes Lord Timberby a good antagonist is because he, even though he doesn't do much in this episode other than manipulating Lincoln, at the very least, the life that he's in really suits his character onto why he acts the way he is, and it influenced Lincoln to the point that I would say for a fact that it's easy for someone like Lincoln to be easily influenced by someone who has the same limo as him, even though Lord Timberby's limo is better than his. Granted, I never understood the appeal of limos back then, since I never been inside of a limo before, but the more I thought about it, it actually makes sense onto why Lord Timberby would be highly interested into inviting Lincoln to places when it comes to his limo in general, despite only having the limo for one day. And when it comes to Lincoln's selfishness, for me personally, him being this stupid actually works in context, because if someone would have a limo and they get influenced by someone like Lord Timberby, it's believable. Which is going to be another factor, but let's not get sidetracked. I always think that the reason of Lord Timberby just attempting to gain some form of attention from other people is because he only focuses on who is better than others when it comes to being rich. And with this being the lesson that Lincoln learns, honestly, this is pretty much the only lessons that Lincoln ever learns in this entire series. Granted, him learning that he should spend time with his family is gonna be rehashed multiple times, but at the same time, when the lesson was teached towards him, it actually works. Even though the worst episodes really beg a differ and change people's perspectives on the Loud Sisters, but I always see them as basically in the white when the story itself is executed in a way where it showcases Lincoln at his worst. So, in all honesty, Lord Timberby is a really underrated antagonist, even if he may not be the most memorable. The next antagonists are Hank and Hawk, who appeared on The Loudest Yard and the Halloween episode Tricked. For me personally, The Loudest Yard, one of my complaints when it came to comparing that episode to the Casagrandes episode is the fact that they always had to make the other team bigger while the current team, which is where Lincoln is in, is always smaller. I always think that this is the type of cliche that gets really overused to the point that it just makes it way too predictable and just mostly unfair, which the season 9 episode did it slightly better, which I'll admit Hank and Hawk make less of an impression compared to Lord Tetherby. Honestly, every time I look at these two on screen, it's always just them just running up against the other people, and for me personally, the season 9 episode really made the antagonist done right. Not because that he is not big like Hank and Hawk, but at the same time, he does other things other than football. And while they did return in season 5 in one of Lin Jr.'s episodes, it doesn't really change the fact that this, along with the Halloween episode, is just a showcase of them being bullies, all because that they're big. And that's literally it. They're just big, and it really didn't give me the impression that they're the antagonists compared to Lord Tetherby or other antagonists. As for the presents in the Halloween episode, they're slightly better. When it comes to them stealing candy, all the while just TPing everyone else's house while making the kids really miserable, they really made a better impression than how they did in the Loudest Yard. And even though that they do return in season 5, it still gave me the impression that they actually knew how to make these characters terrible when it comes to stealing candy, all the while just trying to make themselves better in a way where you can easily see that them getting their just desserts at the end is brilliant. Even though that the Halloween episode is good at being a Halloween episode, and it's better than the Casagrandes episode, you can easily see that they actually knew how to make these two characters get their just desserts properly when it comes to them being scared during the Halloween episode. Meaning that Linso isn't the only scaredy cat in this show when it comes to the Halloween season. Our next antagonist is Sue, whom really showcases the radioactive nature of these antagonists. Since their whole job is to keep everyone intact in the retirement home, and that includes Pop Pop, honestly, I don't really blame her for doing her job, but at the same time, her being this aggressive just showcases the radioactive and over-the-top ridiculousness of the Loud House antagonists and villains. But to give Sue some credit, if it wasn't for the other antagonists or villains being too over-the-top, I wouldn't even see her as a person with problems. With her being the first reactive character when it comes to her motivations, she's really not the worst offender. I would have much to say about her, but the way I see it, it just makes me feel like that she just wants to get back at people because she hates her job and she can't be able to pick any other job that she wants due to life going against her. Just thinking about that would probably make me think about her character a little bit more, but since that she only appears in this episode, she's more of an afterthought. Which is a good thing, not a bad thing, considering that the other antagonists and villains are more outlandish and their motivations get way too complicated and difficult to take it seriously, that you just honestly see Sue as that type of antagonist whom is becoming more of an afterthought, but honestly for the best. Our next antagonist is from the episode Legends, Steak and Stan Stankco, whom Lincoln and his dad are facing each other in Legends, which is a reference to one of Nickelodeon's popular game shows. They're much better than Sue, and better than Lord Tetherby when it comes to them while still being reactive when it comes to these scenarios. I can easily see that they're part of a game show, and you gotta be competitive when it comes to a game show, and when it comes to Lincoln and his dad Linsaw, them bonding is literally what's really important in this episode. And they're not really an afterthought, because if Lincoln and Linsaw just compete Legends on their own without any competition whatsoever, it would have been slightly boring. So they really need antagonists to spice up the story. I originally planned on talking about this episode while comparing to a Casagrandes episode that had similarities, but I would only focus on Lincoln's bond with his dad and not much of the antagonists, because Stan Stankco really had less of an impression, mainly the fact that they're just there, which really goes against my opinions of thinking about this episode before the following Loud House movies came out. It just seems to me that with Stink and Stan Stankco having no purpose in this episode would instantly be a contradiction on the fact that they gave Lincoln and his father bonding moments when it comes to them being close with each other, and it honestly shows onto why people really appreciate this episode a lot more while just ignoring the antagonists, since that the purpose is just to give Lincoln and his dad something to bond with, and that really goes to show when it came to the ending of the episode. Pushing aside that Lincoln and his dad walked in the airport in their underwear, and it gained the attention from people who watched them on Legends, which caused them to dance, even though this led to the police getting involved, it definitely won't work without these two characters. I mean, you can easily see that these characters aren't really the most memorable, but at the same time, I wouldn't even have a different perspective on Legends if it wasn't for the new villains in the Lounge House movies. Even though that they're not villains, Stink and Stan Stankco, but at the same time, when it comes to the purpose, if the writing is done right, I can easily appreciate them a little bit more. Doesn't mean that I like them, but I can easily appreciate their characters slightly more. Thus, we enter Luna's antagonists, Michelle and Doug. I did talk about these characters before, and considering that their motivations is mostly bigger when it comes to them being in charge of a major studio, well, you change a character, specifically Luna, to be something that she isn't. Honestly, I wouldn't mind seeing these characters return if they had the ability to wit them better and not botching them up. Granted, Really Loud Music's purpose is to be a musical, and Michelle and Doug have a song of their own to showcase the point of view that Luna should look into in order to be something that she isn't. Even though that the episode's intentions is supposed to showcase the type of character Luna is, and yes, Doug and Michelle are reactive, but they're actually done with a purpose when it comes to them changing Luna into something that people will adore, which also showcases onto why people still make fan art of Lulu, because in all honesty, it's kind of difficult to not look Luna differently, judging of how that look can easily make everyone go goo goo gaga over. This is also a showcase that you can make antagonists not just for Lincoln, and having these antagonists for Luna really works. It's just really a shame that when you look into these episodes more after witnessing the betrayal of the antagonists and villains in later seasons and movies, you always think that there's always so many potential in order to make these antagonists work if they're being done properly against someone like Luna. Plus, when it comes to later antagonists that go after the main characters, I really don't see an issue of Michelle and Doug potentially going after Luna for basically costing them a lot of money that would have made them a fortune, and Luna just completely dropped it. But that's just basically her character, is that she refuses to be something that she isn't. If Luna picked the choice of being Lula, she would have sacrificed everything. Her family, her girlfriend, you name it. And that really is a showcase of what Luna's character would have been if she never decided to make the choice at the end of the episode. It always gives me the impression that when you have the antagonists only focusing on Lincoln and mostly not the other characters, it really strips away of what the other characters would contribute when it comes to the situations that they get themselves into due to the antagonists getting in the way when it comes to their reactive nature. It's just kind of sad that when this show makes good antagonists, it's mainly done against other characters other than Lincoln. And the fact that these two characters have more of an impression just by this episode alone really has so much potential. But considering that this show's habits of introducing new characters, you always question onto what the other characters would have done if they actually returned. And they did manage to succeed on returning some characters, but if I'm gonna be honest, if they have these characters return and the motivation is to go after Lincoln, I just don't see the appeal. I mean, it could work for a Lincoln and Luna episode, but at the same time, if it's just only focusing on Lincoln, I'm not buying it. A month above has Lacey, who mocks Charles, and it gave Lana the idea to have Charles perform in the dog talent show with the help of Lola, who is just trying to make Charles a better dog like Lacey's and the other dogs from the talent show, which they ended up losing. But, honestly, I really feel like that this is still a showcase of having antagonists against other characters to where Lana's motivation on just trying to have fun with Charles, and when it comes to Lola herself, whom didn't really do anything wrong in this episode, she's just trying to help. I always think that the dogs just being who they are when it comes to relationships really is a showcase of what makes this episode different compared to other dog talent show episodes from cartoons. Even though that it's probably for the best that Lana doesn't have an antagonist like Lacey, I'm always thinking that if she did return, it would probably make her character less looseful compared to what she did in this episode. I mean, she has less impression compared to the other antagonists, including Sue, but at the same time, it always gave me the impression that they just wanted to use her to have Lana get motivation. Especially since that with this being a Lana episode, it's a good Lana episode. So it always makes me feel like that if Lana had an antagonist, it would probably be a lot more difficult to contribute to what the antagonist would do. Granted, Flip was her antagonist in Season 6, but considering this is Flip we're talking about, honestly, including him as the antagonist in this video would be a little too predictable. Now let's get into the Millers. And this really made me convinced that the outlandishness of these villains are starting to kick in more and more. And this is also the first episode where we get the introduction of Lincoln's newest hobby, David Steely. I haven't noticed the details back then since this was after 8 Savvy was dropped, but all I can think of is, did they really intentionally think that people, specifically the old fans, would be on board with this? Honestly, not even close. Here's the plan that the Millers are trying to do. They want to eliminate the cherries while making peaches the number one fruit in the world. That's literally it. They're not planning on taking over Royal Woods. They're not planning on harming the Loud family in any other way. It just centers around fruit, which, considering that people were against Lincoln in this episode, I mostly don't blame them, but at the same time, these antagonists is just a lot more confusing to be taken seriously. When I said in my review of Naughty or Nice that villains are too random to be bizarre. This is the most random I can think of, and one of the reasons why I shown a screenshot of the Millers in my review of Naughty or Nice. Because in all honesty, when you look at how these characters are portrayed, it really feels like that if you take out the whole fruit goal that they're trying to do, they're not really that terrible. And I honestly think that what Lincoln went through in this entire episode would have put him in the ultimate wrong. And when people instantly given up on this show after watching this episode for how they're portrayed, it's almost like that this show was never meant to include spy elements. I mean, sure, there are different ways to have Lincoln as a spy work in some cases, but this episode is really not the case. And it really convinces me that if you are really into the oil seasons when this episode aired, and you just witnessed Lincoln just doing these stunts, honestly, I would think that the family should have believed him, would have meant something if the execution of the story wasn't this way. Truth be told, the Millers aren't reactive, since Lincoln didn't really trigger anything to make them do their goals. The way I see it, it always convinces me that they just have something against cherries and they want peaches to be popular. I mean, granted, it's one thing to have your favorite fruit being the most popular fruit on the planet, but at the same time, if that's literally the only evil thing that you can do, then honestly, it just makes me question onto why that these Millers are spies. It just makes me confused, and it just feels like it's mostly luck for Lincoln to win at the end. And since this is another episode where these characters only appear once, I really don't even know what to believe if they actually returned in No Time to Spy with them being actual spies. Honestly, if it had a different direction, it may work, but at the same time, it only makes me convinced that they clearly didn't know how to make one-off characters good like they used to. The next antagonist is Dr. Carol, who is Lisa's antagonist. I really feel like that this would have been a perfect antagonist for Lisa when it comes to episodes like Time Trap. I would instantly think that this dynamic or rivalry between Lisa and Dr. Carol will probably be a lot more better when it comes to giving material for Lisa. But since this is yet another episode where a one-off character only appears, missed opportunities that people probably didn't see if they're not fans of Lisa. And even though I'm not a fan of Lisa, I can tell you for a fact that Dr. Carol would be a huge benefit for Lisa's character, since that Flip throughout this entire episode blinded by science. Honestly, I feel bad for Flip in this more than House Flip, which, considering I didn't enjoy that episode, while mostly against people who are bashing that episode nonstop extremely, I would say for a fact that Dr. Carol treated Flip much more badly than basically the loud siblings in House Flip. Just because they injured Flip doesn't automatically mean that what Dr. Carol would have done with Flip if Lisa and Lincoln didn't interfere. I'm pretty sure that Flip will probably have a miserable time living life to the point that people will probably feel more sympathetic towards him than House Flip. She was planning on taking Flip to the moon in a rocket. Honestly, if you really think that this is the type of material that can make an antagonist worse than the loud siblings in House Flip, then this is honestly a villain motivation. So I can say for a fact that Dr. Carol, while not being remembered and mostly predictable of her being a scientist, she works as a villain against Lisa. Sure, Lincoln and Clyde were helping out Lisa, but at the end of the day, Lisa had the most screen time, and to give her credit, it gave her something that made me appreciate her a lot more with the whole antagonist and villains ideal from this show. even though I didn't like her in the later seasons when it comes to her episodes involving scientific situations, especially with caveman being brought to life in season 7 or 8, in all honesty, they would have been excusable if she had an antagonist going against her. Granted, it would have been too predictable, and there are some episodes that you can skip, but at the same time, it made me see that they could have actually done something for Lisa's character rather than just having her go through science adventures. Lisa was one of the least favorite characters I enjoy, not because of how she was portrayed, but mainly the fact that her episodes were mostly uninteresting. Compared to the other characters, I always found them a lot more sympathetic, and while it may be in character for Lisa to have less emotions due to how she's portrayed, the way I see it, thinking about this episode in particular when it comes to her thinking of what she did to Flip, honestly, this is an episode what House Flip is done right. And I always think that this is an example of what Lisa can be capable of if she actually had further development rather than regression. And since that Dr. Carol is probably gone from Earth, I'm always thinking that they probably wanted to see what they can do for a Lisa villain, but they were probably too scared to make her to make Lisa a likable character against the antagonist, so they dropped it and just stick to Lisa science adventures. You may agree with me or not, but this really feels like a big loss because this is like the closest of what this show can accomplish on making an antagonist, or in this case, a villain. So I'm pretty sure that if I actually am invested with antagonists and villains before the later films came out, then I'm pretty sure that they would have benefited on having the Loud House continue on in some other way without jumping the shark. And I don't even think that this episode is considered jumping the shark. Our next antagonist appears in multiple episodes other than one, and his name is Vic. Since that he works for Mel Davis and Leni wants to be Mel by getting more votes than Mel Davis, Vic does anything, and I mean anything, to make Leni look bad in front of people. Now, people's complaints about this episode is that Leni is underage to become male. But since this centers around Vic when it comes to sabotaging Leni's chances of becoming male and doing anything to help out Mel Davis despite the fact that she won't approve the choices that he made, I'm always thinking that if he was the antagonist against Leni and towards the end they can't be able to be qualified of becoming male, so Mel Davis ends up becoming the male, things will have worked out easily. So just by seeing Leni facing off Mel Davis when it comes to becoming male of Royal Woods just feels odd to see Vic helping out Mel Davis. Before I thought about it, Vic would have been the antagonist against Leni, but unlike the other antagonists against the other characters, since that the Loud family helped out Leni on trying to become male of Royal Woods, it just makes me think that Vic's motivations is justified in the season 6 episode. But at the same time, considering that Vic has issues to himself rather than him just trying to become male, which would have been a lot more better than helping Mel Davis to stay as male, it just feels like having an underage character becoming male wasn't really thought out in the law process in Royal Woods. Which is odd considering in Rita Your Rights, Rita broke so many laws, and while it may have nothing to do with her becoming male, it just makes me think that if there are random laws that actually allow underage people like Leni to become male, despite the fact that Leni is beyond uncooperative on being a male, I'm pretty sure it'll put Vic in the right 100%. And honestly, the idea of having Vic becoming male would have been something a lot more interesting to see what the environment of Roy Woods would have been like. And considering that this is also the introduction we get from Mel Davis, it seems to me that she is literally the most sane character in this show, knowing full well that she takes her job seriously. And the reason why I never thought about her before I thought about this idea is mainly the fact that everything else in this show really caught my attention more, including the bad episodes. All in all, if they wanted Mel Davis to contribute something, especially she does contribute something in Save Royal Woods, they should have easily fleshed out her character a little bit more, rather than just showcasing that Leni can't become male, even though it just really feels like that this dynamic between Leni and Mel Davis just feels a little underwhelming than interesting. Like, this season 5 episode isn't terrible, but out of all the Loud siblings that don't deserve antagonists of their own, Leni is definitely them. I mean, I would think that she was somewhat interesting when it comes to her arc in this episode, but the way I see it, it just makes me feel like if Lori was taking the spot, she would have taken the job seriously. But considering that she's also unqualified on being male, I doubt that the other Loud siblings would be qualified becoming male. And since this leads to Vic completely tearing Sunset Canyon apart, which leads to Lincoln and Clyde doing this David Steely style, this is where Vic's character falls. Like, I imagine that this episode and the following episode is a showcase of how reactive he is, but at the same time, he really has issues that really makes me convinced that him being male would have saved his character as being an antagonist and possibly a villain. Honestly, without helping out Mel Davis since that he got fired from that job, I don't even understand what his goal is when it comes to going after people that had nothing to do with him getting fired. Granted, yes, it's Lincoln since that he was the contributors of having him getting fired, despite the fact that Leni manages to make things right. But at the same time, when it comes to the Sunset Canyon episodes, it always makes me feel like that they want to make an elderly episode, but they clearly don't even understand how to make Vic's character intriguing when it comes to his motivation of tearing Sunset Canyon apart. And all I'm thinking is, was Sue fired from her job at Sunset Canyon so they had Vic in order to make things worse? For me personally, the fact that Sue was really furious on allowing the elderlies to stay at their apartment rooms, you would think that she would have action against them for putting her in a position where she just almost uses it and having the elderlies win. Or if you're gonna have her return in some other way, have Vic form an alliance with her. It seems to me that they really wanted Vic to be a villain with the motivations that makes him disastrously against the characters, but every time I look at him on screen, especially after his last episode, it really seems to me that him being reactive would easily showcase of why he has so many problems when it comes to losing his job and just taking it out on the people who are just doing the right thing. And the fact that he'll probably make Sunset Canyon terrible if he ever became male, honestly, Vic probably has a thing against elderly people. That's how I see it. And it would have been executed better if he became male rather than Mel Davis or Leni. So, you know, honestly, this episode, with it being one of the final episodes of Season 5, and the fact that the following episode centering around Vic is a showcase of how over the top he is, he's clearly the most off-putting antagonist. And just by witnessing Doom service, he encourages or invites the Loud family to a resort, which is a terrible resort, which is basically a weaker version of Sweet and Sour. I'm really convinced that he clearly has nothing better to do with his life and just wants to go against the people that that just literally ruined his life when it comes to helping out Mel Davis. Honestly, I don't even know which is sadder. The fact that Vic is just doing this for the sake of his own benefit, or the fact that he's getting back at the Loud siblings, which Chip from Big City Greens did this character method much more better. When it comes to Doom Surface, not only that Lincoln and Lisa are the only characters who recognize Vic, their family just go along with it stupidly when it comes to the resort because it's cheap, which honestly, considering that if I witness any resort opportunity that has a cheap price, honestly, it's not going to be good due to the mysteries once you witness it to yourself. I always think that this episode would have been better off if they actually had Vic just making the Loud family look bad in front of multiple people, but at the same time with him just torturing them on doing more paying fees when it comes to the stuff that they do, which is somewhat realistic in hotel standards. It doesn't really change the fact that what they've been through was mainly out of stupidity, but at the same time, it's just mainly a showcase that Vic clearly has something that keeps him going, but at the same time, when it comes to against the Loud family, honestly, this guy really needs something else better than to do other than just being Chip 2.0 or a Chip of this show's version. It just seems to me that they really wanted him to be over-exaggerated against the Louds in order to make him a menacing antagonist. But at the end of the day, after the male episode, it really feels like that he's just carrying the story in any other form for the sake of giving conflict towards the characters when it comes to the hotel that they're in and the misery that they get themselves into. So it just seems to me that Vic is literally the type of character that has issues and is only taking it out on the people who got in his way. Doom Service isn't a terrible episode, but at the same time, it wasn't really a good episode for how it was executed, especially with Vic. And with this being the final time we see Vic, it's really for the best. Joyce Crandall is the best Loud House villain in this entire franchise. There's literally no contest. Because every time I look at her in Savoy Woods, especially after talking about her character in my Lincoln Lounge video from 3 years ago, she feels like a villain that had nothing to do from Lincoln's actions, or even the Loud family's actions. And just by witnessing her just attempting to break the dam of Roy Woods to make a 6th huge lake, honestly, even if it's not sympathetic, you can understand that she really wants to do it for the sake of just trying to get some gain when it comes to that accomplishment. And since the citizens of Roy Woods are doing anything to keep their homes from the dam breaking, you can tell for a fact that she could care less of what happens to anyone at Roy Woods. Not caring about their plans on moving to a different place, doesn't care about kids being depressed that their favorite home is gone, nor even cares about any history of Roy Woods, despite the fact that there is no history of Roy Woods whatsoever. Even after 3 years since this episode came out, it's a huge dedication of what a Loud House material can actually do on making a villain that is done right. I mean, granted, regardless of what you think about the other antagonists before the other 2 movies came out, which is after the first Loud House movie, you can easily see that this show is capable of making a villain right as long as the motivations and goal make sense. The sad part, however, This is the only episode where Joyce appeals. She never returned after this episode, nor making a threatening presence against the Loud family after the events of this episode. And it just makes me feel like that they just dropped the ball on making a good Loud House antagonist that would have benefited this show a little bit more when it comes to villains and antagonists. With this woman willing to eliminate Royal Woods in order to make a 6th big lake, that's just basically a demonstration of what a villain would do in a grounded universe like the Loud House. And the fact that this episode doesn't have fantasy elements, it shows to me that they can make villains without fantasy elements in the way. And every time that when you think about Royal Woods getting flooded, it's just almost as serious as the whole village or valley getting flooded in the second Ice Age movie, The Meltdown. The difference is that while the ice was melting in that film, Joyce is attempting to destroy the dam. That just sums up a lot that they had the opportunity to make Joyce a really great villain for her to come back, but apparently they had other ideals involving villains in the later Loud House movies. And since it didn't make Lincoln look bad, since his choices didn't conflict anything, how is it that difficult for Santa and Duncan to witness that this kid isn't fully naughty? And it just makes me think that when they have security cameras, especially in every moment, honestly, it just makes me think that the database is not only messed up and outdated, but at the same time doesn't even care about Lincoln's accomplishments. It's one thing that it's making Lincoln as a flipper, but still, for how that movie was executing Lincoln's character, it's too difficult for me to see the good in anything when it comes to Duncan and Santa. Getting back on track, our next antagonist is Guy Grazer, who appeared briefly in the season 4 episode Present Tense, and he has a role in 2 season 6 episodes. In Dine or Dash, he really didn't like the food that the Loud siblings made for him, and the goal is to erase the footage before it airs. In Forks and Knives Out, he desperately wants drama and conflict between the two teams, Lincoln and Lin So's team, and Lonnie Ann and Rosa's team, to go against each other in order to make his show good. I have to say this for a fact that if I wanted him to be Lin So's antagonist, it would have to involve a cooking contest, which this episode is a cooking contest, but since it's mostly against the Casagrandes and it's mostly fan service, Lin So should probably have an understanding against the other cooking contestants if that was willing to happen. Since that in this episode, while the Loud siblings are trying to prevent the footage to air, I always think that with them just trying to help out their father is nice, but thinking of what Guy Grazer is when it comes to the ending of the episode, it just seems to me that it will require Lin So to grow a backbone, which, since that he has regression also, it's kind of depressing to think that he'll probably not one up against the antagonist in any other way in comparison to the other characters. Like, there was potential in order to make this work, but every time I think about Guy Grazer, his potential is mostly wasted. Not as wasted as the other antagonists slash villains, but since he's mostly an antagonist, it always makes me convinced that he clearly had something that the writers and people working on the show would have given him, but apparently they probably wanted to use him when it comes to Lin So material that, while it may work in some aspects, when it comes to his character, he instantly became an afterthought. It seems to me that his hot temper, which is part of his character, would have meant something if we actually get to see more and more of his character, judging by the ending of Dine and Dash. And the fact that he is still considering on having Lin So and Lincoln having grudges against Ronnie Ann and Rosa. It's supposed to be a selfish move, but at the same time, if that's literally his motivation of making his show dramatic, which is one thing, but considering that he never appeals after that episode, him becoming an afterthought honestly loses the credibility of this episode and Fork and Knives Out. Granted, Forks and Knives Out is a good episode when it comes to fan service of the Loud family facing off the Casagrandes, even if it's just two members of each family. The fact that Guy Grazer is the one causing the conflict, you probably expected more from his character, but at the same time you probably didn't remember his character that much from his last appearance, which he probably would have made more of an impression, but at the same time, since that he isn't really much of an antagonist against Lin Saul, and with how Lin Saul's character functions, he's let another character with missed opportunity, but not as much as the other antagonists is when it comes to Joyce. So he's mostly in the middle ground, but mostly forgettable. Anyway, let's get into Loe's two antagonists. And she did have two antagonists, and they're from a different college, but at the same time, the episode in season 7 has nothing to do with golf. Even if they're taking place in a golf course, the true intentions of Loe's antagonists is a prank war. Chet and Brooke aren't doing this for competitive golfing, just a prank war, and the losers have to clean the bathrooms. I really don't know what to feel about this. The fact that Loe gets antagonists that feel suitable for Luann, or the fact that her life in college just isn't really that important, and her coming back to Royal Woods in season 8 really feels like an apology towards those people who really want Loe to come back. But at the same time, what she did in Fairway University really feels less important, and making her leave her family in the beginning of season 5 less impactful. I mean, looking into this episode, it's somewhat of a good episode of Loe and Luann when it comes to Luann coaching them, and it's a much more better Loe and Luann episode from season 8, and we do get to see the return of Loe's college friends. But when it comes to an actual Loe Loud episode for her antagonists, honestly, I don't even know what they're doing with Loe's character, and I don't think it would even make a difference if she stayed at Royal Woods rather than going to Fairway University. I'm not gonna lie, Brooke and Chet really have good character designs, and them being antagonists against Loe would have worked, especially with the idea of Loe's college facing off their college when it comes to a golfing tournament. Would it be bowling? Yes, but at the same time, it would suit Loe's character more when it comes to her being independent against two people from a different college. But since Brooke and Chet's motivation is to prank Fairway University students, honestly, they're not reactive, but at the same time, their motives are just too juvenile to the point that they would have been better off as Luann antagonists rather than Loe's. I would think that Luann's purpose in this episode is just for this episode to have another pranking episode, which makes it mostly pointless considering that there's another pranking episode later on in season 7 centering around Hall, Benny, Wan Yan, and Lincoln, to where her pranks in that episode really feels more accurate, judging the fact that her coaching the other characters in Pranks for Nothing. I'm really starting to convince that they clearly don't even know how to write Loe in the scenario on having her game villains when they have the opportunity right in front of her with Brooke and Chet. Whenever I see Loe in this episode, she's mostly taking a page from Lincoln's motivations from the first April Fool's episode by setting off the trap so no one else would be a victim of those pranks. And I'm always convinced that every time that you witness this type of material done better, I really feel like that Lori deserves more better when it comes to the writing that she doesn't really deserve. I mean, this episode isn't terrible, but if we're thinking about antagonists and villains, these characters won't even return to do something different other than pranking. Which really makes me convinced that this is a missed opportunity for Lori to have antagonists of her own in order to make her cooperative when it comes to the environment that she was in. And since that she is back at Royal Woods, it just makes me feel like that this Fairway University thing has become an afterthought of all afterthoughts in this show. And because this show couldn't get enough afterthoughts for the fans, we come back to A Night to Remember, whom could have been a good antagonist against Luna and possibly Lincoln, but since my opinions of this episode still remain the same after almost a year, let's just say Spies took away Or's development, not just taking away a bonding episode between Lincoln and Luna. The thing is that when you have less screen time on this character, it's kind of difficult to take him seriously due to the multiple problems that this episode has. I may have been harsh towards this episode almost a year ago, but the thing is, when you have these factors just eliminating other factors, it just makes this episode a little bit more difficult to enjoy. And the entire episode's purpose is just to make you know and learn that No Time to Spy is canon. But at the same time, it also makes me question onto how any of this is supposed to work if they are willing to make the spy things work, with this also being the Lincoln and Luna episodes without the family getting in the way. I wish I could say more about Or's character, but since that she's just basically a less interesting version of Noah from iCarly, I really felt like that there would have been something else that could have benefited his character more if he actually had more screen time, without mostly the spies getting in the way. And with the spies mostly getting in the way, this is one of the reasons onto why I'm not against Lincoln for the choices that he made in this episode, whom would have been better off making choices with Luna instead. It really feels like that when they have these ideas to make the road trip arcs work, they clearly don't even understand that they're not taking full advantage of the locations, which they did in this episode, but at the same time, it always gives you the impression that without any development of Luna, especially with her being a better fan than Or, and the fact that Mick Swaggle just feels mostly an afterthought when it comes to the whole night scenario. Honestly, there are so many different ways in order to make these scenarios work if they actually focused on the antagonists a little bit more, having Lincoln and Luna bond while also carrying the episode on their own, and also showcasing that Mick Swaggle can do a little bit more rather than just being Luna's idol, because this really feels like a big downgrade to Mick Swaggle's character. He may got captured, but at the same time, it always makes me to believe that if it was mostly focusing on him and not including the spy elements, we will actually see something from his character other than just being Luna's idol. I mean, granted, I'm not a fan of Mick Swaggle, but at the same time, I know full well that they would have done more for his character rather than just being a victim of abduction. And don't worry, I am going to talk about Lincoln's spy obsession in this episode when it comes to me talking about No Time to Spy, with this being the continuation from that. But for now, there was one more antagonist that we have yet to talk about. Summer Camp ticked off, which is the final episode of Season 9, which will lead to the camping arc into Season 10, showcases Jack, the leader of the Tigers, and after being messed with from him, Lincoln declares a battle against him when it comes to the camping games, which he loses all of them, and when it comes to the final game, the Tigers cheated, which, for me personally, I would say that Jack and the Tigers are supposed to be the typical bullies, just like Hank and Hawk from the Oyo seasons. But since he's not too big like Hank and Hawk, I would easily forgive his character a little bit more. Truth be told, in my opinion, this is the best episode centering around Lincoln when it comes to the world trip / summer camp arcs. Since I didn't enjoy how he was portrayed in Bizarre Tournament A Night to Remember, I feel like that this is the closest we're ever going to see him as a better character. And with his heart being in the right place when it comes to characters who don't deserve to be second class and everyone should be equaled, really his choice of declaring on who should be the Cain of bunks of some sort, it's probably mostly on him, but at the same time, like every other situation he gets himself into when it comes to being mistreated by other characters, this really feels like the only optional solution to make him make this choice in order to make his points proven. The biggest reason onto why Lincoln can't be able to tell on Gramps about what is going on is because his new friends told him that they will be labeled squeals if they do that, so it's basically snitching. Granted, I have nothing against Lincoln's new friends in this episode, since that they do contribute on helping out Lincoln and Clyde, but with the conflict centering around Lincoln being put into this position, honestly, he wasn't really as selfish when it comes to making the choice of facing off the Tigers. Before watching this episode from beginning to end in preparation for this video, I saw clips of this episode months when this episode was brand new, and I really didn't like how Lincoln was portrayed as in a losing effort, in the same veins as the other episodes that he was in a losing effort since nothing really changed. But at the same time, it does a better job on showcasing Jack being superior over others, and he's not big compared to Hank and Hawk. Like, when you have a character that big, it just makes it too obvious, and just by seeing Jack, he's a bully that is done right. Granted, not better than Chandler, but at the same time, in his own way, a bully done right when it comes to how he's designed. But in all seriousness, the fact that the other campers, especially the older characters, don't see what is really going on when it comes to the other campers feeling really uncomfortable due to the Tigers up-running them and taking mostly control of the camp. I understand that they wanted to make Camp Macedon different and it's not all sunshine and rainbows, but the way I see it, it makes me convinced that Lincoln is always put into these positions due to characters literally putting him down. And while Jack putting him down isn't too physical when it comes to bringing Lincoln's character down, it just seems to me that they can't be able to make an antagonist work without those types of unfair restrictions. I mean, Jack being this competitive is a showcase of what he is mostly capable of, and done more better than Hank and Hawk, but considering that he makes amends with Lincoln towards the end, honestly, the fact that this episode has the amount of episodes as the Europe World Trip arc, it kind of makes me think that the subplot centering around Lola, which does factor into Lincoln's plot, but when it comes to Lin So's subplot, they will probably were original episodes that were scrapped. Like, I'm not against camp episodes if the Loud House capitalized those ideals, but thinking that there are multiple missed opportunities involving this arc, I wouldn't even have an issue at all if the entire 10th season centered around camping. I mean, they would probably have to find multiple different ideas to make it work, but still, it makes me convinced that they probably have more ideas for this arc, but apparently they can't be able to do them all and just have to pick the ones that are really suitable. And all I can say is that Treasure Hunt is literally the worst episode, and the fact that that's a Lincoln episode. Lincoln just can't catch a break without having one bad episode centering around him. Honestly, this episode would have been more better if we did see showcase involving Jack's character, instead of just this episode in particular. Say all you want, but even if Lincoln's friends do come over when it comes to them doing camp activities, honestly, they will probably contribute less when it comes to the antagonist that Lincoln is up against. And just by thinking that Lincoln and Jack would be friends after this episode, I can say that it's probably less believable than Lincoln being friends with Chandler in the ending of Geos for Fears. I mean, I would say that Jack had potential if he had more episodes in this arc rather than just this episode only. And I feel like that the final challenge between the two teams would have been more impactful if it was all building up to the final episode of Season 10. That's really the thing, is that when you have these ideas and you incorporate them in the Loud House, they could work, and while this episode is good, it could have been better if it was cut into multiple episodes. If we actually had a Season 10 involving summer camp episodes, the Loud House would have done something different, but would have actually worked in its favor when it comes to how they make the summer camp aspects work for the other characters. And since that Lori, Leni, Lisa, Lynn are the only Loud characters that get an episode of their own in this arc, it just feels a lot more depressing that the other characters don't really do much. Granted, Lola did help out Lincoln in this episode, and Lucy did contribute something in Treasure Hunt, but at the same time, I still didn't like that episode, and it would have been better off replaced with something better than that. Okay, that is all the Loud House antagonists / villains that I've came across from seasons 1 through 9. I didn't go through all of them, but at the same time, these antagonists are mostly the best examples when it comes to Loud House handling antagonists the right way, and mostly the opposite. Sometimes these antagonists work when it comes to the writing that they get, but most of the time when they're mostly reactive, it's kind of difficult to take them seriously. Truth be told, if we never had any Loud House animated movies, especially the live action ones and the Casagrandes movie, then these antagonists will have been mostly afterthoughts at most. But at the same time, they really didn't drag anything down when it comes to the characters. And with the writing being good, it makes the protagonists unlikable done correctly. But if it wasn't for those movies existing, then it really gave me a different outlook on not only the antagonists and villains of the seasons, but also the protagonists. Now, I am going to mention Kings of the Con later when I talk about Naughty or Nice centering around Bad Santa, and regardless of Bad Santa being a terrible character than the Kitty, when it comes to him being a villain, honestly, the Kitty isn't really much of a villain, and not even an antagonist. But at the same time, for how she instantly is being used in a way where it just makes it difficult to believe that she was an antagonist from a savvy, honestly, I don't even know what to believe. Like, thinking about that with the idea of Loud House movies into villains becoming a major factor onto why that this show is bad at making antagonists and villains, it's clearly made the Kitty the ultimate afterthought, since that this was the episode that old fans left the Loud House. And while there were more bad episodes after this, it really convinced me that with the Kitty being the only thing that people were thinking about, and the choices that Lincoln and Clyde made really affected their characters, This was really brand new back in 2019, but 6 years later, thinking about this episode now, it's still a terrible episode, and it also showed to me that the IQ of Lincoln and Clyde has gotten much more worse, especially Lincoln in the Christmas movie, which I'm gonna get to much later. Let's head into Chandler, who is the antagonist against Lincoln when it comes to him being Lincoln's bully. Back then, I really didn't... I had an issue with him not changing his ways after Geos fulfills, but after growing accustomed towards his character, it always makes me feel like that they're willing to do this in order to make Lincoln have conflict against another character, which, it's fine. You can use Chandler to make it work against Lincoln's character. And in some cases in these episodes, it does work, especially in Broadcast Blues. In occasions when he attempts to do something his way and he isn't fully aware of any negative feedback, it just makes me feel like that he's the type of character who would instantly want any attention despite not being positive. And as much as I understand that it may be too cliche for a character like him to be bland as a bully, I can easily say for a fact that it does a showcase of making Lincoln's bully something that Lincoln can have something against. Like when Nickelodeon attempted to listen to the Lungo fans when it comes to them wanting Lincoln to have a bully, Chandler instantly comes into mind, and truth be told, I really don't blame Nickelodeon for making the choice of having Chandler being Lincoln's bully. But considering that this show's issue is to never make any of the characters leave any choices that they make alone, including when the world is going after Lincoln when it comes to a character like Duncan, just really absolving him unfairly. Like, the Halloween episode, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, well, Chandler causes the mess and not Lincoln. It would have been something else if they actually continue on with this method that Lincoln isn't fully responsible. But at the same time, it's also a showcase that they're not even willing to commit to this commitment no matter what. In A Really Haunted Loud House, the antagonist of that film is Xander, who is Chandler 2.0, but to the extremes when it comes to his popularity. He's a social media person, and it really convinces Lincoln to go to his party to become one of the cool kids. This really made me convinced that Xander's motivations in this movie, while may not be memorable in the fan base, considering that they focus on the animated franchise, as in the movies and seasons, I can't even imagine if Chandler was Xander this entire time, and the fact that the kids are stupid enough to follow him. So, just by witnessing Xander's actions in this entire movie when it comes to acting revenge against the Loud family's house because they've been giving them dental stuff rather than candy. Maybe this was before I had the knowledge of social media influencers just brainwashing kids, but at the same time, the fact that this kid is in middle school and the fact that he has a following in middle school, it just makes me question onto how middle school works in this universe. Not the Loud House universe, though, the really Loud House universe. Xander is the most reactive character possibly in the top 3 or 5 of Loud House antagonists and villains. Because the fact that this kid is willing to take it over the edge by just destroying something inside the Loud House, all the while taking Lisa's pumpkin to destroy it, like, what is his goal to accomplish in all of this? If anything, I didn't really expect Chandler to do something like that because it would probably feel too much for his character. And I honestly think that this type of character being only used for the Willy Loud House is mostly for the best, but at the same time, with him being the antagonist in the Halloween movie, it just makes me question onto how social media works in this universe in comparison to the animated version. And since this is supposed to be a showcase of Lincoln not being with someone who is a terrible influencer and supposed to spend time with his family, really, if they actually thought about Lincoln's choice onto why he did it in the first place, even though that Lincoln had no idea that his house was the reason onto why dental material was being handed out instead of candy, I don't think he'll contribute much in a family that is handing out dental material rather than candy. And if Xander and his kids, mainly fans, figure out the whole idea of a house handing out dental material even without Lincoln's call, honestly, it's kind of difficult to see Lincoln in the wrong with him being mostly the antagonist onto why they came to his house in the first place. It just seems to me that they can't be able to make Lincoln difficult to root against, but at the same time difficult to feel sympathetic due to any predicament that he's in. This may not be the worst offender, but still. Like, if you don't remember Xander from the Really Loud House, I don't really blame you, especially if your mind is focusing on Chandler himself, since that if he actually attempted to do all of this, I would probably think that he would probably have less of a motivation on being male in Naughty or Nice, rather than just wreaking havoc in order to be superior over others. Is it just me, or is the bullies in this show, while generic, which is the complaint, are so reactive that it's just difficult to see the point of view on being bullies? Like, Xander really gave me a different point of view involving Hank and Hawk a little bit, but at the same time, it just shows to me that bullies aren't really the best when it comes to this show. And when it comes to the bus bullies, it's mostly a different story, and I really didn't feel like that there were actual antagonists, since that they're mostly bullies. It took them this long to make a bully character work, in this case Jack, but at the same time with the issues that I've mentioned earlier, it's really a lose-lose situation to think that this character would make an impression if he had more episodes, if Summer Camp Arc had an entire season dedicated to it. When it comes to the antagonists in the Casagrandes, they're not any better, but at the same time, with their reactive nature and how the show works, they're really not problematic. Monica in the season 2 episode involving Carla opening boxes in order to get some attention, truth be told, this is honestly the perfect antagonist for Carla. Since Carla signed a contract that he had someone else to write it while they were asleep, he's in the predicament of opening multiple things, and if he doesn't continue on, the entire Casagrandes building would be taken away. Is it outlandish? Yes. Is it beyond over the top? Yes. But since that the main characters aren't Lincoln and his sisters, I can say for a fact that having the Casagrandes taking the spotlight really makes this antagonist better. I mean, if I always think of Carla making these type of choices, it's mainly his own greed, and if Lola was in his position, I'm going to assume that Lola will probably think more about herself and not understanding the consequences completely. I mean, I am one of that when it comes to her own episodes, especially in the later seasons, but with Carl being in this position of instantly just can't be able to escape, I'm pretty sure that Lola will probably have a difficult time escaping, since the stuff that she really wants are really special to her. And considering of what we've seen in Ticked Off, yeah, she's really not the type of camping person. I mean, Carla could be a camping person, but at the same time, I doubt Lola would take the job seriously. And considering that Lola has a pageant career, honestly, Monica's character would have worked better if it centers around her giving Lola everything that she ever wanted when it comes to her pageant career, rather than just giving Kawa boxes of opening them and just being a showcase of what it's like on opening something, of what mysteries are inside. So I'm always thinking that if Lola needs an antagonist, it has to suit for her character, and for me personally, the fact that Kawa can fit the role much more better in this than her, I still felt like that the ideal of having a Lola and Kawa episode would work. Especially, I had a Christmas ideal centered around Lola, Kawa, along with some characters going on the road for a Christmas adventure, but at the same time, I would try to get into Lola's character while ignoring the bad, and the bad that she does is too much. But when it comes to Kawa, really, I would probably feel relieved that him sharing an episode with Lola would be somewhat worthwhile. The other antagonists in this show, Blaze, who is the manager of Elisa, and he is so into the prices, well, mainly the revenue that Elisa is making, and that's literally all he's focusing on, while Elisa just wants to live out life without the pop star life getting in her way. I did compare this episode to really loud music, and it's mostly the fact that both episodes are musicals while also showcasing what the characters will go through, specifically Luna and Carlota. And if you left out the Casagrandes movie, it's probably no contest that Blaze is better because he is more grounded when it comes to his motivations, and while he did appear on VIP'd, he didn't really contribute much on being an antagonist. So just by seeing him bits and pieces in this episode, it does showcase that he can do more in the plot if he was involved more and more. Carlota's goal in this episode is obviously being a celebrity BFF with Elisa, since Elisa is a sensational pop star. And considering that Blaze is mostly getting in the way, even if he doesn't appear much in this episode, you can easily see that the type of material that has been worked when it comes to Elisa and Carlota, honestly, it's mostly a shame that the Casagrandes ended, since that we won't be able to get another episode involving these two. If we actually had another episode involving Carlota and Leni, I wouldn't mind having Blaze being Leni's antagonist. It just seems to me that even though it's not confirmed or canon, after witnessing the type of character that Blaze is to Elisa, she files him. So it seems to me that him going out on doing something else rather than being Elisa's manager will probably lead to him encountering Leni once he sees her with Carlota. If anything, this is pretty much the closest that I want for Casagrandes antagonist to come back in comparison to Monica. And even though I did left out the Casagrandes villain, I am still saving that for later, judging the fact that that villain is less complex compared to the other villains in the Loud House movies. But now, we're entering the 3 animated Loud House movies, and one of the reasons onto why this video is Cartoon Crisis 3 material, and I didn't make the new intro and outro for nothing. Not only that the following animated movies really gave me a different perspective on the antagonists in the seasons, but it also gave me a better appreciation of Morag's character in the Loud House movie. Back then, before No Time to Spy and Not Till You're Nice came out, this was the only animated movie to the point that 2 live-action films and the Casagrandes movie were literally in expansion in some other way for the Loud House franchise. And thinking about this movie after witnessing No Time to Spy and Naughty or Nice, honestly, people were way too harsh on this movie. I mean, granted, it's not the Loud House movie we really wanted, especially this being announced back in 2017. But the fact that no one had interest in Morag's character, considering that this is also a showcase of the fantasy elements come into play. And unlike Naughty or Nice, the fantasy elements didn't really drag the main characters down. And since that the fantasy elements actually have a purpose in this movie when it comes to Morag's character, if Lincoln and his family never ever came to Scotland, then I'm pretty sure that it would still be a lose-lose situation for anyone who lives there, due to the type of character Morag is. Morag is honestly the actual definition of what a villain should be, even if it's not Loudhouse material. But at the same time, after witnessing Fifi and Bad Santa, it just makes me feel like that people were really criticizing her character a little too much, other than how the other characters were portrayed. And since that this is also the film where people were focusing on Lincoln's choices and character and not the antagonist, honestly, I don't really blame them with this movie airing back in 2021 on Netflix. Even though that there are still problems in this movie when it comes to how the Loud sisters were portrayed, in all honesty, compared to how they were portrayed in the following films, honestly, they're not really an afterthought in this the more I think about it. And when it comes to Morag's motivations on ruling Scotland, especially using powers in order to take control of a dragon, I can instantly say for a fact that her motivations, while not as big compared to Fifi's when it comes to her history, it doesn't change the fact that that character has issues that really shows that she isn't really much of a Loudhouse villain compared to Morag, and more of a James Bond villain. Even though that Lincoln and Morag still didn't had enough interactions throughout this movie, since that Lincoln needs to understand the purpose of being the Duke, it also made me see that they had more interactions with each other, more than Fifi, and more than Bad Santa. I mean, Fifi may be a different story, but at the same time, I can instantly say for a fact that they had more interactions than any of Lincoln's interactions with Fifi and Bad Santa. Maybe not combined, but still. The reasoning of Morag wanting the Louds to leave so that she can take over Scotland while being the Duke is all because of how the Loud family is bothering her. And even though it may be a thing that people just don't like when it comes to Morag's motivations, to be fair, they've only thought about that because she was the only Loudhouse villain when it comes to these movies. And with only 3 films, both in live action and 1 from its spinoff, I always think that the reasoning of people not remembering Morag that much is the fact that she just couldn't be able to make an impression without any other antagonist or villain that can be better than her. And if there's one thing I can give this villain credit in comparison to Fifi and Bad Santa, is the fact that she is facing off Lincoln in a fight. When it comes to getting the power to control the dragon, or them fighting off the Duke's crown. That's pretty much the biggest positive that Morag has over Fifi and Bad Santa, and it's mainly the fact that she is close to Lincoln's size, while Fifi and Bad Santa are too big to have Lincoln face them off in an actual battle, which I would give those villains credit for that, but at the same time, it also made me see that Lincoln is willing to face off someone else with his own talents, and when it comes to him not causing any conflict, which is something that the following films is a huge downgrade of his character, especially Naughty or Nice. And the more I thought about it, even in the following film, Lincoln's sisters, despite being side characters, actually contribute a lot more when it comes to basically the final moments of this movie. Even though that it's difficult to take this seriously, the way I see it, it makes me feel like that this is the most we're ever going to have Lincoln having comfort from his sisters, but also showcasing that they thought the good in him compared to No Time to Spy and Naughty or Nice. And even if I would think that Naughty or Nice is a showcase that the Lout siblings, including Linso and Rita, have every right to be furious at Lincoln. It doesn't really change the fact that the other issues involving that film is a bigger showcase that that film had a terrible villain with the world building completely broken to the point that it's just difficult to look at Lincoln in the wrong regardless of him doing, despite what he did being an accident. Even after more than a year since this movie came out, I still can't be able to see how this movie would have played out if it had nothing to do with spies or David Steely, because just by thinking about this movie from time and time again to where it just makes me see so many issues, especially when Naughty or Nice gave me a different perspective on the antagonists and villains of this franchise. Honestly, this film, along with the following film, they didn't written Lincoln as an actual 12-year-old boy correctly. I'm sorry, but whenever I think about this movie and the following movie, it just makes me feel like that spy material just never suits Lincoln whatsoever, and him not admitting that he is naughty due to his flipper's position is really a showcase of to why that I barely come back to these films. Granted, it wasn't because of this video, I would have ignored them altogether, but with the main topic still being about antagonists and villains, honestly, they can't be able to have Lincoln fit the role as the protagonist when it comes to spy elements and the Christmas stuff in the following film. If any of you guys didn't watch my review of No Time to Spy a year ago, I'll fill you in. I really didn't like that Malta was an undercover spy, especially since that we only had one episode of her being an undercover spy in Pop Up the Question, which before that episode, we had multiple episodes of her while she didn't do any spy material. Even if you're gonna say that she's keeping her spy history a secret, truth be told, she wouldn't be able to expose her secret and Pop Up the Question. And just by thinking of the idea of these two getting married, it would have worked. I'm not gonna lie, it would have worked for an actual Loud House movie. Granted, the idea of thinking about it when Instagram came out, it was mostly little. But at the same time, you get appreciation of her character when it comes to the life that she has due to her being alone. But with information involving Pop Up the Question, she doesn't really feel alone as I thought. Would that make her character bland? Yes, but making her an undercover spy honestly takes away the charm that she had in the season 3 episode. And it's odd that in High Crimes, Malta overheard Clyde's grandma about Lincoln and Clyde being detectives, but she has no reaction of them being spies, especially with them being into David Steely. Let's be perfectly honest with you. If Malta found out about this, she would have been surprised, and yet at the same time, hoping that she would be a little cautious of what Lincoln would have done if he grows up to be like her. But since it wasn't really the case, I can't even think that Malta would have that type of reaction in these episodes before Pop Up the Question. Like, whenever you look at Malta in these episodes before Pop Up the Question, she feels more innocent, and yet she feels a little better as a nuisance rather than being a spy undercover. With these issues in mind, there's more of a reason onto why I didn't like this film more as time passed. Like, you can easily say that the dynamic between Lincoln and Malta is the highlight, since that they are having interactions with each other, but if it's mostly centering around spy material, really, I can't be able to take Moto seriously. And when it comes to Lincoln's choices, when it comes to his spy fantasy, mostly taking the job that Moto tells him not to do. Honestly, there's a lot more going on when it comes to the antagonist, to the point that it's really a difficult scenario that if Lincoln didn't do any of this, it would still be a lose-lose situation for him and his family. And for me personally, the arc that Lincoln gets in the second half of this movie just feels phoned in. Mainly his choices backfiring, which would have meant something back when this episode was brand new, but with more material coming out, especially with the following film, honestly, there was more of a reason onto why I'm saving the sacrifices that he did in this and the following film after I talk about this in Naughty or Nice. Let's get this out of the way. If Moto was never a spy, Fifi wouldn't even exist. I'm being really honest with you that she wouldn't even exist, and her motives and character, especially her reactive nature, wouldn't even become a thing if Moto was never a spy in this universe. I'm gonna go out on a limb to say that not only that Fifi works as a James Bond villain, just not as a Loud House villain, it just makes me think that she clearly does have issues like the other antagonists in this franchise, but at the same time, do you really think that she would be capable of tracking down the Louds when it comes to the decisions and choices? Like, was she lucky enough that Lincoln abandoned a savvy after came to the con and went into something that caught his interest more than a savvy, specifically David Steele? If anything, I would probably expected a scene where she actually does that by giving him something to enjoy more than a savvy, but since this is mainly out of luck, I'll probably imagine that she'll probably think hardcore if Lincoln stayed into his A-savvy hobby rather than just getting into David Steele. In fact, just moving past David Steele completely. And if you seriously want me to see her so filled with rage that she really wants Lincoln and his family to get killed when it comes to Moto, she would probably look into every single detail of what Lincoln does when it comes to his obsession with David Steele, when it comes to him being a detective, and the missions that he did during his time against the other antagonists, specifically the Millers, and the fact that she barely contacted the Millers when it comes to talking about that Lincoln kid. It really would have been less of a far stretch on just seeing the type of kid Lincoln is. And honestly, the whole plan all along when it comes to setting up the whole spy material against Lincoln, really, I can't be able to see what Lincoln would have been like if he never had any spy fantasies in his mind, if he actually hung out with his family. And remember when I said that the Loud siblings were good in this movie? Well, they're not terrible, but at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that they have less of an impact on the family message. And they actually build that up without the spy elements whatsoever. Like, when you look into whole episodes without thinking that she's an undercover spy, you can instantly see that she is fine for what she is. And truth be told, if we actually had this version of Moto in No Time to Spy without having nothing to do with spying, honestly, I would feel more sympathy towards her and feeling sympathy towards Lincoln when it comes to having the opportunity to keep the reins. But since that they have to make these movies bigger when it comes to spy elements, fantasy elements, and Christmas magic, it really drags Lincoln down, and not the reasons of what people thought about when it comes to the plot of this movie when it first came out, whether you enjoy it, and I was literally one of the only people who didn't watch this movie while making a review out of it because I was doing Summerpalooza 5 Steven Universe Marathon. I watched this movie in September of last year, and the people on Twitter stated that family should go first no matter what, which is mostly an argument towards Lincoln when it comes to him selling his David Steele merchandise in order to find replacement wings that aren't as good as the old ones. The thing is that I doubt that this movie owned the family message because as far as I'm concerned, with these details centering around Morto's character and the fact that they really wanted to make a spy movie by having Lauta's characters, the title of the movie is extremely inaccurate. I'm sorry, but no matter how I see it, no matter how I try to appreciate people enjoying this film and calling it one of the best Loud House movies ever, it's mainly out of pure coincidence that they enjoy spy material and the Loud House together, but for someone like me, they really don't fit together. Fifi's character in this movie, when it comes to her wage of killing the Loud family, since that Morto is part of it by any means necessary, regardless of her being one of the best Loud House villains in the Phantom's perspective, she is literally one of the most reactive characters the more I think about. And really, the more I think about the idea of Lincoln facing off her in some other way, may have worked if it wasn't executed this way. Because as far as I'm concerned, Fifi just really becomes a bigger afterthought considering that she only exists because Mortal is a spy. Her backstory is accurate for her revenge on Mortal and her family, but at the same time, since that's the reason of Mortal becoming another cover spy makes her exist, I clearly can't be able to imagine what her plan would have been like if Lincoln wasn't into spies, all the while that Mortal wasn't a spy, and it's either her being completely normal and something different ended up happening to her husband to the point that it may not be Mortal's doing whatsoever. Like, thinking these details connectedly to the point that it just feels a little bit more confusing when it comes to how the characters were portrayed in previous seasons. It just feels off-putting to see Lincoln as a spy in his fantasy, since that everything that he went through in this movie is mostly a trick from Fifi, and if, in all honesty, the fact that the Loud family just barely recognizes Lincoln's absence, which is probably a lot more bigger than them not witnessing he was kicked out of the restaurant. In the last movie, that is, the concern of Lincoln sacrificing himself really feels less meaningful than what people thought about upon witnessing this. I'm really sorry, guys, but at this point, the fact that the Loud family is mostly an afterthought when it comes to how they're portrayed in this movie, it makes me feel like that the family message isn't really worth it when they're not focusing on one of their kids, who is a boy, going out on the island doing his spy fantasy, and just instantly think that it's his fault that they're in this predicament in the first place. Like, regardless of you saying that Lincoln puts them in this position, honestly, with them being neglectful on not knowing where he is, it all factors in that Lincoln's sacrifice in this and the following movie had less impactful, and they really killed the grounded aspect of a character nearly getting killed while also being killed. And I'm gonna get to that after talking about Naughty or Nice. I've been thinking about this idea of having one of the characters getting killed off if I ever did a fanfic of it, but with how this franchise portrays the sacrifices and near-death experiences, Man. As if it wasn't more of a reason onto why I can't be able to take the family values seriously in this show anymore compared to the earlier seasons. So, say all you want, but truth be told, with the villain being a problem of dragging Lincoln's character down, and with how the following villain in the following film really drags Lincoln's character down more and more, it's honestly difficult to take him seriously, even if he had to make the choice of sacrificing himself in this movie, since that one person needs to be left behind. But at the same time, when it comes to the following movie, it's a completely different story that showcases onto why that this movie isn't going to be enjoyable in my point of view for a long time. And I doubt that I'll have my opinions change due to that. Well, it all leads up to this. Naughty or Nice and Bad Santa, which I've stated in my review of Naughty or Nice. Bad Santa is one of the worst and most stupidest villains of this franchise. And if it wasn't for this movie, this video wouldn't even exist. In my review of this movie nearly a month ago, I didn't talk about the Naughty North Pole and how it functions. It's mainly the fact that I was focusing on Lincoln's character, how the story was structured, and literally everything wrong when it comes to Christmas being ruined in this show. If it wasn't for the idea of Bad Santa becoming Bad Santa and the many plot holes here and there, I would say for a fact that this would have been passable if the North Pole never turned naughty when Lincoln switched listers. All I can say is that if you're going to include Santa in the Loud House universe by any means necessary, in order to make a Christmas animated movie, don't make him incompetent. Because even before he turned naughty, it doesn't really feel like that he's the most competent Santa compared to the other Santas I've seen in other cartoons. And the less we see about them in those cartoons, specifically Jimmy Neutron, the Powerpuff Girls, and even the Fairly Odd Parents, mainly the first episode, you can easily tell that they were mostly affected when it comes to the main villain, Princess Morbucks, Timmy's wish, and Jimmy's invention that actually knocks Santa out. And the reason why Christmas magic exists at the North Pole is because of Mount Christmas. Yeah. And we never get any backstory onto how Santa is Santa without Christmas magic, and the fact that the reverse Lysis causes the Christmas magic to become bad magic in some other way, even though it just raises more questions onto how Lincoln switching the Lysis will reverse the Christmas magic. And honestly, if the Christmas magic is the main reason onto why that the technology at the North Pole is whacked up due to Lincoln's hacking the Lysis, honestly, this is pretty much, well, everything just completely falls apart. Santa, like any other Santa in any other cartoon, is magical, which, fair point. It makes sense for him to have magical powers, but at the same time, with his whole stick, he sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, he knows when you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. It makes this whole Flipper technology, mainly the database, a contributing factor onto why all this backfires on him. Like, it's one thing to have one of his elves, Duncan, to absolving Lincoln, but considering that it's mostly of Duncan just trying to get the job done to go back, it leads to another problem that Duncan is really the reason onto why Lincoln made the reckless choice to begin with. He made the database of the whole nice and naughty lists. And even if it's mainly of him just relying on the technology more, which regardless of it having a factor of the Christmas magic, it just leads to another issue to where he just isn't as nice, to the point that the guards in the North Pole headquarters of some sort, one of them didn't really like the naughty or nice system that he created. Granted, it's just one clip of this when it comes to the Nutcracker guards, but I'm gonna be real that the fact that Duncan isn't getting called out due to the system that he created is further proof that the whole Christmas system just isn't really fleshed out with this type of direction. Duncan originally planned on updating the database, but Santa wants him to do it old school by absolving Lincoln, and this is where we see Santa making the biggest mistake. I can say for a fact that the update could take a while, but truth be told, it's also an indicator that this kind of ruined Duncan's character throughout the film, since that he was this close on making a good choice by updating the database, but since that Santa refuses to have him do that, any likability that he has is gone. Now, I can understand that he went through a stressful situation on finding Lincoln, but at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that he was stalking Lincoln and Clyde, which a reaction that Lincoln did is normal. And for me personally, the fact that one of the naughty traits that he gets is mainly imprisoning or capturing Duncan, which is an elf, and this just proves to me that updating the database is really important in order to prevent any of the events that happened. Like, whenever you think about Duncan's motivation when it comes to his interactions with Lincoln, it just seems to me that him getting the job done just feels forced when he's not willing to give Lincoln a chance. And when it comes to him relying on the technology, it just makes the whole message of not viewing people based on the database and learning about them face to face in person feels really underwhelming and badly executed. And with all this taken away of the whole song lyrics that I mentioned, it really makes me believe that Santa really came from Mount Christmas. I'm being really serious, is that when he doesn't rely on security cams, on viewing kids on the nice and naughty traits, I really feel like that having technology in the North Pole really affects everything in this movie, especially when the database is really going against Lincoln in any predicament that he gets himself into, causing, and of course, him changing the world. It's really no surprise that I didn't like Lincoln in this world due to how his predicament is a lot more severe than any of the predicaments that he got himself into. But at the same time, with making Christmas more of a different holiday than how it was in the other Christmas specials from this show, it really makes Christmas more difficult to take it seriously due to the choices that not only Lincoln makes, but also the other characters. Him being the only flipper in the family, not including his entire family that is on the nice list, is beyond unrealistic. Like, it's one thing to have him being put in this position since that he isn't a saint, but at the same time, him being down farther than he should be is just over-exaggerated to the point that it just discredits Duncan's character. Even though that Duncan was doing his job on absolving Lincoln, it doesn't change the fact that his absolving wasn't really the best. Since that he relied on the database and not Lincoln as a person, even though that Lincoln and Clyde are the first humans he ever met, really, it just shows to me that his judgment is way too severe to the point that Lincoln wouldn't come to the conclusion on hacking the North Pole computer due to how he's being treated by Duncan. For how Lincoln reacts when it comes to the choices that he makes, it's actually miserable and scary. I mean, regardless if Lincoln was being in character or out of character, or mainly that's part of his character, this movie convinced me that the reason onto why Lincoln acts selfish is because another character gets in his way, and it gave him the mindset of being extremely concerned, of being on the naughty list, and while acting egotistical and arrogant on being nice. And with Santa trusting Duncan too much, honestly, when Duncan left out his tablet after coming back to the North Pole, this really showcases that Santa and Duncan are really incompetent as Christmas characters. Because if you mean to tell me that even if they were never learned that Lincoln lives in a family where one of his sisters have technology that can instantly allows him to hack into the network, it made me see the bigger picture that the database is more outdated due to them not focusing on the Loud siblings and Rita and Linsaw. Like, I know some of you guys are getting sick of that criticism, but at the same time, the fact that nearly all of the Loud's family except Lincoln is on the nice list, despite the choices that they made, and the fact that they don't qualify as flippos, and Duncan is only focusing on Lincoln due to the database only focusing on Lincoln only. It's no secret that the people making this movie still hates Lincoln. And at this point, after 8 years after Cristovino got fired, the hate towards Lincoln is getting done to death, and this is really too over the top for him to make a choice that was so reckless to the point that it made the entire planet naughty. It made me see that Lincoln was far worse in the live-action Christmas movie, and with him being an antagonist really suits much more better when it comes to the conflicts that he caused that has nothing to do with Christmas magic. A Loud Tales Christmas that was released 4 years ago was one of the first things that I've experienced when it comes to Loud Tales material. Even though that The Loudest Thanksgiving was the first thing that I've experienced from the Loud Tales, which is honestly for the best, this movie, I only had little ideas involving this show and when it comes to the characters. And truth be told, despite my review of this movie 4 years ago being outdated, at the same time, thinking about it years later and since Naughty or Nice came out, just because that this movie is live action doesn't automatically mean that it's completely terrible. I mean, don't get me wrong, this movie is still terrible, but when I say that there is some kind of passion into this movie, they at least managed to make the family values in this movie work more better than Naughty or Nice. Lincoln had good intentions on having the family come together for the happiest time of the year, and he really contributes that a lot more in this compared to Naughty or Nice. Well, it's mostly a him problem rather than a family problem, and in this movie, with this being a family problem to him, honestly, the choices that he made is terrible, and it does showcase that Lincoln is in the ultimate wrong possible, but at the same time, it actually works more better than how he was portrayed in Naughty or Nice. He interfered in her sister's lives, causing Leni to lose her job, which he managed to help her keep her job in Season 3, causing Luna and Sam to break up, which is way extreme, and not only that, she made Lowry left Fairway University with the assistance of Bobby by driving back to Royal Woods while it's extremely freezing, and she would have had hypophobia. The fact that the family message is actually against Lincoln for the stuff that he did makes me see that he was a much worse character done correctly in this film than how he was portrayed in Naughty or Nice. Like, you can say all you want about this live-action Christmas movie, saying that this is still worse than Naughty or Nice, but at the same time, looking into Lincoln's character more and more without anyone in the way, this is possibly the only time where Lincoln does something selfish and total against his character on his own. And for me personally, it makes me see that this movie is a showcase of what to do with Lincoln's character Don Juan more better than how Naughty or Nice portrayed Lincoln due to Christmas going against him. Because in all honesty, Christmas was never against him in this live action film. Especially Christmas magic. In fact, I would say that him being the worst antagonist when it comes to the other antagonists is no argument for me. That's how much that this movie really changed my perspective ever since Naughty or Nice came out. And since I find it difficult for the Lau family to forgive Lincoln, I will admit that it was grounded. This film, unlike Naughty or Nice, at least attempted to make this grounded to the point that even though that the Willy Loud House is terrible, at least it didn't include fantasy elements. It may have science elements, but at the same time, I would probably take that over basically anything magical against the characters. So with that all in mind, this movie is a definition of the entire planet coming after Lincoln, even when he does nice things here and there. Because this movie, unlike the live action movie, has Lincoln's negative traits, but at the same time, they just hammer it in when it comes to the choices that he makes before hacking the lists. And for me personally, the idea of him being so obsessed with getting a gift just feels not naughty whatsoever. I mean, you can say all you want that it can be naughty, but at the same time, he wasn't rubbing in on anyone else's face. And when it comes to the song that he ruined, it just doesn't even feel like it's not hypocritical towards the other characters, since Loie really had an obsession of opening her gifts in 11 Laps of Leaping, and when it comes to Lola, honestly, she wouldn't even hesitate on wanting a gift before Christmas morning. And since that he is always in an unfair position, unlike in a live action movie, honestly, I would probably be a little bit more scared on the choices I make in a world involving the Loud House. Like, you can say all you want that Lola would have been a perfect candidate to take Lincoln's position, but at the same time, thinking about the database, the Christmas magic, the everything involving Christmas not being how it was since 2016, this plot wouldn't even work if Lola or Lin Jr. took Lincoln's place, because of how Christmas functions when it comes to Christmas magic and the database. Honestly, if the database is literally the only problem, minus the Christmas magic, then I would say that this movie would have been better off without the naughty North Pole, because that just makes me to believe that everything that happens in the North Pole is clearly an example of why I can't be able to see any characters in the white, especially when they don't deserve any of this, while seeing Lincoln in the wrong despite causing the entire planet in reverse due to nice and naughty lists. And for me personally, just by seeing the introduction of Bad Santa, despite the fact that we didn't even see what happened to him after Lincoln hacked the North Pole network, honestly, this is a definition of what not to do on making an evil Santa. If you expect me to believe that Santa predicted Lincoln's reckless choice and him turning into a gingerbread by sacrificing himself, all the while that the magic came from Lincoln's heart, it has nothing to do with Pokemon Tears from Pokemon the first movie, it actually proves Lincoln's points of Santa forcing him to do something for not being naughty, and he blames it on him. And the other point where he told Loie that Santa made him to have her and the others get coal. Like, putting into the context of how Santa functions in this movie, and the fact that Duncan is literally the only reason as to why Lincoln came to this conclusion, it's becoming more apparent that Lincoln's selfishness is becoming justified when it comes to his dialogue. And the fact that you always look into his character more than Duncan and Bad Santa, this is where the villain problem really comes into play to why Loud's House is really terrible at villains and antagonists, but more specifically villains. The whole naughty and nice aspect when it comes to Lincoln's nice side and naughty side, and him being the flipper, would have worked much more better if we actually get to see the choices that he made in previous seasons, rather than just pulling pranks on other characters, which, honestly, he's really in the right for doing so. Him throwing a snowball at Lola is literally nowhere near as naughty, judging the fact that Duncan is ignoring Lola's behavior and reaction, considering that everything that she put Lincoln through in the series, despite some of it being mostly his fault. And for me personally, with the extremes that Lola put Lincoln through, honestly, throwing a snowball is nowhere near as naughty. Like, if he threw the snowball at Lana, then I can understand the naughty nature of that. Pranking Principal Withers by having her teeth get green due to a St. Patrick's prank. Honestly, compared to her sending Lincoln to Canada, having the entire school being frozen, causing harm towards the students, honestly, it's kind of difficult to see Lincoln in the wrong, judging the fact that he's in a more unfair position than how he was before entering middle school. When it comes to Mr. Grouse's character on Lincoln pranking them on April Fool's that he found gold that makes him rich, and it turns out to be a prank. Really, if that happened outside of April Fool's, I would probably think that that still wouldn't be considered naughty, considering the type of character that Mr. Grouse is. Like, yes, he was one of the main characters from the first Christmas episode, but at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that he, like Lola, are into greed, especially the Diamond episode from Season 5, and not to mention that Luann pranked him on winning the lottery ticket, which would really affected her more due to how big the lottery ticket is to Mr. Grouse. And the other stuff that he did is mainly tricking people, specifically the bus driver, to get some ice cream. That just kind of feels a little out of character for him to do, to the point that it just makes me think that he was probably bored out of his mind to do something like that for the sake of having ice cream, since it's mostly his family eating most of the ice cream, which I really don't blame them to that extent, but at the same time, I really feel like that those types of naughty material is just way more difficult to be considered naughty. Even though that if Santa didn't predict Lincoln on making the reckless choice and instantly see of how much that it would affect the entire planet, it would only prove Lincoln's point better, because, in all honesty, he wouldn't even be this paranoid on hacking into the North Pole, judging of how that, with how technology and magic functions, he really has no other alternative, and the fact that he will probably be in the crate if he doesn't do it due to Lynn Jr.'s letter to Santa. Yeah, the database is so screwed up even before Lincoln botched it up. This is the proper example of Santa existing, making Christmas a more difficult holiday to enjoy in the Loud House compared to the previous Christmas material from the Loud House, because in Season's cheating, no one got into Lincoln's way when it comes to making his selfish choice. And the fact that he actually wins thanks to Lily, and the fact that he manages to give Lola a gift, truth be told, I can't be able to imagine what the plot would have been like if no one got into Lincoln's way, if he was still naughty. Like, he wouldn't even come to this conclusion once he figures out on Christmas morning on receiving coal, but at the same time, if the other characters found out about this, I'm still thinking that they're not willing to comfort him, even if Lincoln didn't hack into the North Pole network. That's how much that the Loud family are so secondary, to the point that it makes the roles in the last film and the first movie more accurate than how they were portrayed in this film. And honestly, even if I understand that Lincoln is mostly the part of the blame for changing the entire planet into naughty, it doesn't really change the fact that Duncan and Santa would have prevented this if they actually found out what happened to Duncan's tablet. So it just makes me feel more like that they're more incompetent on the outcome of what really happened that would have been avoided if they actually focused Lincoln a little bit more rather than just absolving him for about less than 5 minutes. Mostly specifically while Duncan meets Lincoln face to face. And since that this dynamic between Lincoln and Duncan takes up the majority of the second half, to the point that it just makes it really difficult for me to see Duncan as a likable character, well, he never gets called out from his side of the blame and all this. Really, I can't be able to find any enjoyment involving this dynamic between Lincoln and Duncan. Even the dynamic of Mortal and Lincoln kind of works, since that spies are mostly grounded. But really, every time I see Lincoln and Duncan together, especially the final minutes of this movie, this isn't really a dynamic that is worth exploring towards, since it would have fit better if Lola was in Lincoln's position. So at this point, I can't even think that Lincoln being mostly responsible due to Christmas magic and technology is even going to help his character in the long run, especially having him got what he wanted towards the end. But at this point, I have addressed the issues involving Duncan for far too long. Let's get into Bad Santa again. If it wasn't obvious enough, Bad Santa is one of the worst villains in this show, and this video wouldn't even exist if this movie didn't exist. If I'm going to be real with you, the fact that this whole magic thing in the North Pole affected Santa, it just shows to me that he is beyond incompetent and a really terrible Santa to see what is actually going on of what could happen. Like, I would give him the benefit of the doubt that he probably didn't expect Lincoln to hack into the North Pole network, but at the same time, if he was fully aware of him having a tablet, he would have had Duncan come back to him before it was too late. And since he has this motivation of killing people for not joining on his side, honestly, it's supposed to make him terrifying, but at the same time, despite this being an opposite of his nice persona, it doesn't really change the fact that it would still be a lose-lose situation regardless, but we're gonna get to that later. This is where I come back to my point from Kings of the Cornwall. The character's IQ in this movie is more depressing, to the point that it's actually more upsetting than Kings of the Con, but also in a depressing way, because we've always seen that Lincoln's family learned or knew, due to Lincoln blurted out that he broke Christmas, and his whole motivation was just to get the multi-tour. But then on the same day, Bad Santa shows Lincoln and his family the 3 clips of Lincoln telling Duncan that if he's naughty, I won't be able to get my gift from Santa. The second clip where he tells Clyde that he's going to hack into the North Pole by switching him to the nice list, and telling Lisa to put him on the nice list. Even though that Lisa heard him minutes ago, and truth be told, the fact that Lincoln showed his family the gift that he got from Santa, along with giving all of his family coal, you seriously cannot expect me to believe that these characters didn't remember what happened on Christmas morning, since for me personally, the time to leave Roywood's to go to Dingerhausen didn't really take multiple days. And with 2 characters calling out Lincoln on ruining Christmas, specifically Loli and Lola, which they just ended up dropping it completely due to those scenes ending. I really don't even know how to take these characters seriously when they're so dumbed down that them being grounded feels non-existent. And with them being the family of forgiving Lincoln is also non-existent because they probably forgot about forgiving Lincoln after they left Royal Woods in order to save Christmas. Like, if you're mean to tell me that they forgot about forgiving Lincoln and just go back to antagonizing Lincoln when it came to his reckless choice, honestly, I'm not taking this family dynamic seriously because this movie didn't even own it. Even in the live-action movie, even if the family message was against Lincoln for him ruining the lives of his family, it didn't change the fact that Christmas magic wasn't involved, and since that Christmas magic is involved with everyone normalizing the idea that Santa exists, it all makes Lincoln's character look bad, to the point that I can't even think that this clip alone is more of a showcase of how idiotic these characters are, while just proving bad Santa right by any means necessary. Back then, where the character's IQ was dropped due to plot conveniences, it was frustrating, yes, but at the same time, it wasn't depressing to the point that while Lincoln and the other characters did terrible things, it didn't really affected them being in the family that really drives this show to make it worthwhile. But at the same time, back then, the fantasy elements weren't even a thing, and they became a thing in the second season of the Casagrandes and the fifth season of the Loud House. You don't even understand how much of a low level that they took on the character's IQ on being this dumbed down, because at this point, the fact that they just don't think differently involving Lincoln despite having every right to be upset with him for ruining Christmas, it just makes it difficult to believe that the family aspect is a major factor. Because regardless of the last film, especially with them attempting to save Lincoln, at the very least, I can easily see onto why people will appreciate them at least trying to help out the one and only boy in the family. Well, aside from Lin Saw, since that he's a man. But my point is that if you're telling me that they instantly forget literally everything and just think that they just don't matter, to the point that when they see stuff on screen, I can't even believe that this family value thing even works in this movie in any shape or form if I just ignore all the bad things that the Loud family did to Lincoln. Honestly, the biggest reason onto why Bad Santa's plan work is because the IQ of the characters are so dumbed down that it's actually depressing, and how unfunction this scene is. Like, you can't make me to believe that this would all work if the character's IQ wasn't dumbed down, and it would go against Santa to the point that the Loud family would probably see the good in Lincoln rather than just being stupid enough to only being upset towards him, all the while being disappointed towards him, to the point that I can't root for them. That is really sums up a lot on the fact that the family just never thinks better about Lincoln, especially when it came to his sacrifice in the last film, all the while saving Royal Woods, and at this point, the fact that Christmas, everything about it just damages Lincoln's character to make him look bad, makes this a lot more depressing to the point that me doing that fanfic is more of an indication if the character's IQ wasn't dumbed down, including Lincoln, where his panic attack pushed him over the edge due to the whole planet going against him, especially during the Christmas season, regardless of him hacking into the list. And whatever if you find my fanfic uncomfortable, at the very least, that's how much that this movie ticked me off due to how badly they made the character's IQ to, well, honestly, if Lincoln ever had a panic attack, they would probably do a terrible job at giving him a panic attack. And just by seeing Lincoln admitting that he's naughty, is beyond forced. And the fact that no one is willing to see the good in him, especially from his family, despite what he caused, honestly, you can't expect me to believe that he would react this way. Like, just by seeing how he was from the beginning of the series up until now, they actually made him an actual kid for the right reasons, rather than portraying him and others as dumb as a brick, which really affected the Loudhouse much more, just as much as the fantasy elements really affected nearly everything of what made this show great. But you know what? I'll play by this movie's rules for just a bit. Let's just accept the fact that Lincoln knew what he was doing, and he admits that he is naughty while joining Bad Santa's side on taking over the planet, on making it more naughty, while having Santa view Lincoln as the naughtiest superstar in his point of view. Honestly, it still wouldn't even work. And it just showcases of how idiotic Bad Santa is when it comes to thinking the naughty side due to his current state, and nothing more other than being naughty, which really takes away any form of cooperation that he would have had with Lincoln. Even with all the emotional gaslighting that he did towards Lincoln, honestly, he wouldn't be able to succeed his plan if Lincoln is 100% willing on helping him on making the entire world naughty while getting his way. This really feels like the closest we're ever going to see Lincoln's fantasy come true when it comes to getting everything that he wants, but at the same time, he'll just probably be mostly miserable on being in this position on helping out Bad Santa, and for how Bad Santa reacts towards Lincoln, this isn't really as convincing as Fifi and Morag manipulating Lincoln and having the idea that the pairing between the two kind of works when it comes to Lincoln doing something evil. Because this clip alone is a demonstration of the fact that the song that Santa sings towards Lincoln, he's really out of his mind due to the fact that the magic went against him to an extent that, honestly, Christmas magic is becoming more of a curse than Lincoln giving a curse to his family in Bizarratorium. And considering that Lincoln's intentions wasn't to make Christmas terrible for everyone since it wasn't entirely his plan, it just makes his reckless choice honestly a little bit more innocent, judging of how Bad Santa sees Lincoln in his own point of view. I'm just saying that if Lincoln never ever hack into the North Pole network, all the while getting coal and still lose, honestly, he would probably come to the conclusion that if he did hack into the North Pole and actually stopped before it was too late, honestly, he would probably be the nicest person to prevent the disaster that could have happened if Santa actually saw him rather than Duncan observing him. And this brings me back to the episode Out on a Limo, where not only family is way more better executed than in Naughty or Nice, it also showcases that Lincoln's selfishness really works since that it feels grounded, and having a limo while living the rich life feels a lot more prestige than basically the opportunity that is mostly given to him from Bad Santa in Naughty or Nice. And thinking that Bad Santa exists back then after watching this film, all the while remembering 11 Louds of Leaping, that goes against Lisa's character on thinking that Santa doesn't really exist, or possibly. Like, Lincoln was a different character back then, even when he was selfish, and that's mainly the fact that Chris Savino was working on the 4 seasons. The more I think about Bad Santa's naughty song towards Lincoln, honestly, not only is this a perfect indication that these two characters are barely connecting with each other when it comes to the situation that Lincoln got everyone else, including himself, in, but it also showcases that Bad Santa doesn't really fit the Loud House universe whatsoever. regardless of what Lincoln caused, it just makes it difficult to believe that he is actually this easily magically transformed into Naughty. I mean, if I think that a bad Santa will work, is that if you actually rewritten him and rewritten the whole Flipper system and actually rewritten the plot in order to make it accurate on the predicaments that the characters get themselves into by turning the entire planet into reverse due to the Christmas time continuum. And thinking about the Christmas time continuum, it's honestly too difficult to take it at face value. And this is where we lead to the main characters facing off the naughty versions of the North Pole. Honestly, it doesn't really feel impactful, judging the fact that it just feels more underwhelming than exciting when you think into these details of Christmas magic, the database, and how Christmas functions. And in all honesty, the fact that Santa didn't really think this through to the point that Lincoln would cause his reckless choice to happen, I really don't even think that any of this is worthwhile. Hence why I barely talked about it in my review, because it just feels really, really lazy to have an Avengers Endgame style of battle between the good guys and the bad guys. Like, all of this would have been much more better if it wasn't the Loud House. It just doesn't really fit the Loud House whatsoever, and it just makes the characters less grounded and less relatable, to the point that even though that Lana may got her wish on meeting a reindeer, which, truth be told, it's not really what she expected with the reindeer being naughty. Honestly, it would have been much more better if the rewrite of this movie would have focused on none of the North Pole people naughty while keeping the North Pole intact, as in nothing changed, and Lana encounters a reindeer that really excites her. And thinking about Lincoln more about this movie and the last movie, he's really not fit on being a hero in some form. And it's not because of him causing something that was his own doing, even if it's by accident, but it's the fact that him fitting the hero role would only require the entire planet to be grounded without any fancy elements. And Save Roy Woods is the closest we're ever going to see Lincoln as a hero, and when it comes to what he did in the Halloween special back at last year, I'm mostly convinced that him riding a space saucer, which is an alien ship, to where he couldn't be able to cooperate on putting him onto the nice list in Naughty or Nice, really, this makes me think that him being a hero in the Halloween special is mainly of him just being put into the position because of Zach's character of being into aliens and whatnot. Like, I'm going to be fully real with you that if it wasn't for Zach in the Halloween special, then I'm pretty sure that aliens wouldn't even exist. In the same veins as Myrtle being a spy, that with her not being a spy, Fifi wouldn't even exist. Even after almost a month since this movie came out, I always think more and more of how badly Naughty and Nice was due to the fancy elements, the database, Santa, and literally everything going against Lincoln, to the point that I doubt that they're going to top of what they did on making Lincoln the ultimate wand in all of this. Because if they do, it will probably require the entire galaxy, which, for me personally, I doubt that that would even work, considering that if you're going to have the Loud House being a galaxy series in the later seasons, then I'm honestly expecting Jimmy Neutron to do that. When it comes to Lin So's subplot, when it comes to this old person having Christmas magic, which could raise questions of this person ever went into the North Pole, honestly, the fact that it's mostly a plot device for Lin So, even though that his original intentions is to use the Christmas magic for his pudding. You know, honestly, I can't even relate to his position on pudding, despite the fact that he really wants his family to enjoy his pudding by making it good, and he uses this magic to make it look good. Because if we live in an alternative world where that was the case, honestly, his character wouldn't be fulfilled due to how those little focus on Christmas magic and how it functions in this world, to the point that the negative impact that it had due to Lincoln's screw up, really, I don't even think that it would probably make Lin so happy if he actually succeeded on his goal. There is a few things I want to talk about Bad Santa's character, especially when it comes to Lincoln's sacrifice, but at this point, I've already talked about his character more than enough along with Duncan's character. This section has been going on for far too long, so at this point, let's get into why that these villains, specifically Bad Santa, really affected the Loud House. Now, with how that this show's fantasy elements really took this show a different tone that really makes people questioning the grounded nature of the Loud House, regardless of this being a kid's show or not, it's really difficult to look at this show the same way again due to Christmas not being the same as it was since the beginning of this show, specifically the first Christmas episode. And I always think that these types of material, when it comes to other fantasy elements, at the very least, they didn't drag the characters down. I mean, when it comes to the Lincoln episodes from season 7 and 10, specifically Bizarratorium and Treasure Hunt, really, it was a little too much to consider that Lincoln being at fault is mainly the whole idea that fantasy elements are accepted. And when it comes to the other characters being in Lincoln's position, I will probably defend them due to how the fantasy elements just is becoming more normalized as we keep getting more and more. And while it may not be the same case for other villains, specifically Fifi, it doesn't really change the fact with the ideas that they use really detach the Loud House from what it was in the earlier seasons, and putting aside the live action films that were grounded, every time I think about No Time to Spy, Naughty or Nice, they don't feel like Loud House movies. They just have Loud House characters in them involving fantasy when it comes to Christmas and spy elements. And it's kind of difficult to look into the antagonists, specifically Fifi and Bad Santa, on their own, especially them being placed into the Loud House universe. As for antagonists, specifically Xander and the other characters from the seasons, really, when you look into them without thinking about the word villain, they're trying way too hard to be entertaining while trying to pose a threat towards the characters to where you just question, honestly, if this show wasn't meant to be grounded, what can you imagine these characters would do if they have magical powers? To the point that they make themselves less antagonistical when it comes to having an upper hand against the main characters unfairly. Even if I try to imagine what the characters would have been like if they never had these elements, it would honestly make me think that they can't be able to make one of the antagonists better without having a different twist that distinct themselves from other Loud House antagonists that are meant to be grounded. If any of you guys are into fantasy elements in this show, keep in mind that when the oil seasons came out and how it showcased the characters being grounded, you still get the impression that nothing really dragged them down. How life can drag them down, but when it's not forcing it on them completely, then I can instantly see that this is the life that I can understand why Lincoln will be in a miserable predicament with the world going around him, when it's mostly having nothing to do with his choices. And especially the events that he can't even control of due to his sisters. If we actually live in an alternative universe, well, this show is still grounded while the fantasy elements never got explored or expanded upon in season 5 and onwards, then I would instantly think that with this show, wouldn't even jump the shark. I mean, granted, it would still have terrible episodes when it comes to torturing Lincoln and putting Lincoln into these positions where he can't be able to make right decisions, but at the same time, I can easily see for a fact that if they actually care about this show more when it comes to the source material, then they will probably think carefully if they have the idea of including magic or anything else. Because with all that in mind, it takes away the focus on the characters, even in some episodes where they actually have good development, despite that won't make a difference with the other stuff going on. It just makes me to believe that they can't be able to take the characters seriously while they're grounded, to the point that the passion that was made in seasons 1 through 3, despite bad episodes, they just can't be able to replicate it that well. And it's honestly a shame that this has been happening for 6 years and it just continues to get worse and worse. For how the films function when it comes to their villains, and just instantly thinking that it will probably work out because it will make them bigger, just because the Loud House is trying to be bigger when it comes to these movies doesn't automatically mean that everything is going to be okay. And it got even more worse when you take into the consideration that without having an actual Loud House movie that is grounded, with the close being No Time to Spy, you can easily see that these elements are affecting the characters a lot more when they do the same mistakes like they did in the past, but at the same time, the fantasy elements are going against them to the extreme. Obviously, Lincoln is the biggest victim of how the writing involving him and the fantasy elements really drags him down to make him more worse than basically anything else. And if it wasn't enough of how much of his panic attack in my fanfic is a showcase of why he wants nothing to do with Christmas anymore, and the fact that this movie barely capitalized on family values. It may be annoying of how much I brought it up, but at the same time, I still couldn't be able to find any sympathy towards the Lau family for undeserving Cole. With each film that passes when it comes to the Loud House trilogy, mainly the first film from 2021, No Time to Spy and Naughty or Nice, they barely even capitalize the family values whatsoever, to the point that I can't be able to take this seriously, even though that the film is supposed to expect us to take it seriously, because of how that they just try to make the ultimate downgrade on Lincoln's character in order to make all this work. And even if another character or a different character, specifically Lola and Lynn Jr. were in Lincoln's place, it still wouldn't even work. I had this idea that it may work, but with how bad the writing was in Naughty or Nice, honestly, there's really no saving grace on having Lincoln being replaced, because it wouldn't be fair towards Lola or even Lynn Jr. By this point, I'm honestly getting sick of Lincoln treating family as the most important thing to him when it comes to it being the core elements of his kind heart. Because at this point, it's just becoming a thing against Lincoln rather than for his character to actually be better, because if it happens so many times, the regression just gets even more worse and worse. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't even think that there's ever going to be a better way of showcasing Lincoln as a better character if he actually saves the day without him causing it. It's like that this movie or anything else, when it comes to antagonists and villains, they can't be able to allow Lincoln to grow on his own, nor having him make a mistake, a terrible mistake on his own without someone getting in the way. And in all honesty, with the same methods happening over and over again, truth be told, it's more apparent that without these characters, there won't be any conflict whatsoever outside of Lincoln. So this film really gave me the impression that no matter what Lincoln does, and no matter how he tries to think this through, due to anyone getting in his way, honestly, his selfishness is really his enemy when it didn't need to be his enemy without anyone in his way. It makes me convinced that the reason onto why Lincoln keeps gaining regression while not learning any lessons, especially from No Time to Spy heading into A Night to Remember, is because he literally can't be able to witness the experience on his own in order to learn on his own. So this is honestly a flaw that can work, but at the same time, it just becomes more apparent that there is no other way for Lincoln to actually continue on learning without anyone in the way, and the fact that he probably can't be able to think clearly without anyone just having him learn without them getting in the way, it's honestly becoming more crystal clear that it's always a lose-lose situation for Lincoln. If he didn't interfere on the mission in A Night to Remember, honestly, something else would have happened. It may not be his fault, and he may be innocent, but at the same time, they're unwilling to make him a better character as a child other than doing the same thing repeatedly. And really, witnessing that so many times, I don't even see Lincoln as a kid, because even if him being a kid is justifiable when it comes to him being selfish, it doesn't change the fact that this has been happening for so many times that I just really wanted to see what the plot would have been like if Lincoln wasn't the main conflict of it all, to the point that you can see him as not a burden to the family and actually taking his job as man with a plan seriously. And while yes, it did backfire on him in the earlier seasons, at the very least, it wasn't to this extreme. You can always consider that without the villains in these movies, there'll probably be no conflict, but at the same time, it would also showcase that the Loudhouse can handle movies without them, to the point that having the characters get more screen time and more development would have made these movies worthwhile. And since it led to so many missed opportunities due to Nickelodeon making these decisions, it just makes literally everything about these movies lifeless, even though that they're supposed to have passion into them. And every time that I think about that ideal in general, it just makes me think that the villain aspect just drags everything down, including the main character. Let's go talk about the 3 near-death experiences that Lincoln went through in this trilogy. In the first movie, Morag accidentally tripped over the edge with Lily and Lincoln while trying to retrieve the crown, and while this is still qualified as a near-death experience, it still doesn't qualify as a sacrifice. But I never heard multiple people talking about this. Most likely the fact that Lincoln and Lily got saved by the dragon, but at the same time, this really feels like people were focusing on other issues when this movie was brand new when it was streaming on Netflix back in 2021. But compared to the near-death experiences in Naughty or Nice and No Time to Spy, really, with the issues that I had with those films, this really feels more tamed, even though it shouldn't be more tamed. I've always think that this is supposed to be where Lincoln stays on the nice list completely, and even though it doesn't really make up for putting his family in danger, it doesn't really change the fact that he's willing to make the sacrifice instead of Pop-Pop, or even Mortal if she is willing to make the sacrifice. And I honestly don't think that there was any other way for Lincoln to make up his choices that he did in this movie if I was willing to be invested with him being into spy material. But considering that this also leads to my issue of the Loud family being neglectful towards Lincoln in this movie, not realizing, well, he has been, I'm honestly more convinced that if they actually see him getting killed, will probably have less effect on how they treated him, knowing full well of how the film or series functions. And that's where it leads us to Naughty or Nice. After Lincoln sacrifices himself, preventing Duncan from turning into a gingerbread, he turns himself into a gingerbread. And since that this is an important moment for Duncan, just by witnessing Lincoln saving him, along with the Loud family being really shocked and depressed to see Lincoln actually died in comparison to No Time to Spy, they really killed the meaning of death in this franchise, judging of how that the Loud family is so happy to see Lincoln alive to the point that they act like it's no big deal. Lana also eats Lincoln's head that was still turned into gingerbread. This is a definition of how death has no meaning whatsoever. Now, would actual death happen in the earlier seasons of the Loud House? No. It would go a little too far to be grounded, but at the same time, death is also part of life, that a person won't come back to life, and death really feels so much effect towards other people around you. But with how the Loud family reacted in Naughty or Nice, after Lincoln came back to life, honestly, there's probably no point of the Loud family's memories to be wiped out, considering that it didn't really traumatize them that much. To the point that you can't convince me that if they did remember that moment without the memories getting wiped, it's literally no big deal to them, since that they're just going to have aggression just as much as Lincoln. And really, it just makes Bad Santa's motivation on killing people for not being on his side a lot more meaningless. To the point that it's supposed to be dark, but when you can't be able to capitalize that type of darkness, then it really shows that you're not really qualified on making this show dark when it comes to death. And this really has a massive effect on Lincoln's character when it comes to redeeming himself, because even if he didn't even cause a conflict and still sacrifice himself, honestly, his family wouldn't even take it seriously. So, honestly, he would still be in the same position to the point that it makes his near-death experiences feel less meaningful, to the point that him putting his family first before him also becomes less meaningful, which really sucks out all the life of Lincoln's character and other characters, because regardless of him going through so much pain and chaos in the Loud family, the fact that he's experiencing more serious scenarios, I find it difficult to believe that he is this emotionless and this soft to accept anything that comes in his way. Because if I'm gonna be real with you, I'm still going through the knowledge that in my Christmas fanfic, he would still hate Christmas due to the world going against him and how Christmas magic affects him more than anyone else on the planet. Hasn't this taken me this long to realize that this show had jumped the shark ultimately for me? Yes. But at the same time, I didn't watch any of the Loud House episodes whatsoever, since that I'm focusing on other stuff, and me just thinking about what this show would have been without any of this stuff, this movie really broke me physically to the point that I would say that this is honestly the biggest derailment of the Loud House, and the villain itself is having less attention than Lincoln due to people only focusing on Lincoln. It really takes away all of the morals, the life lessons, and to be perfectly honest, the grounded nature of these characters. Which really sums up onto why I feel uncomfortable thinking about these movies and thinking about people's critiques towards these movies while ignoring the other aspects. It really makes the victory that they get in the end just feels less valuable, which is why I didn't see the value of Lincoln winning a better multi-tour, because in all honesty, I can't be able to think of a different way of seeing Lincoln in a different position if he didn't got a better multi-tour. At this point, if you can't make the victory worthwhile after what these characters have gone through, when you have different directions involving spies, Christmas magic, and dragons, it doesn't feel satisfying nor heartwarming. Which is honestly sad that you're probably never going to have that feeling in this show due to them making the same things over and over again. I may have been keeping the Casagrandes movie on hold throughout this entire video, but not only is it the best Loud House movie, but it's actually sad that it handles its villain better than any other villain in the Loud House movies. Yes, Ucumu is a god to the point that gods exist in this world, but the fact that he can actually do less problematic fantasy issues compared to the Christmas magic in Naughty or Nice, and the fact that No Time to Spy is a showcase of what not to do on including spy elements into the Loud House. And truth be told, with this movie being superior over the Loud House movie from 2021, I can instantly say that Ucumu really feels like an enemy being done right for characters like the Casagrandes. Not to mention that the dynamic between Shawa and Ryan works more better than the dynamic of Lincoln, Moto from No Time to Spy, Lincoln and Duncan from Naughty or Nice, and truth be told, if we really want to include Angus's dynamic with Lincoln, it still counts, but just not as focused compared to Lincoln's other dynamics in the later films. But if there's one thing that this movie that the villain had no negative impact on is Maria, who is a major part in this movie to the point that this is more family compared to basically anything else I've seen from the other Loud House movies. Whatever if you agree with me or not. Now yes, this has the formula of Ryan messing up something so bad that it led to chaos and she has to reverse her crisis in order to make things better for everyone, but at the same time, considering that this is not Lincoln, and we can't even imagine Rita in Maria's position due to how she was written, you can instantly tell that these characters are different, which really made me appreciate of the Casagrandes writing, despite the fact that people just didn't enjoy it compared to their enjoyment from the Loud House. This really feels like the greatest fan service of what people really wanted from this franchise. And the fact that it's in this spin-off movie where Maria has a more purpose, and the fact that she really didn't have focus that much in the spin-off series. Honestly, this is really a good way to showcase of what she can do. Now, granted, it's mostly the roles being reversed of her wanting to do activities with Ryan, while in the season 1 episodes of the Casagrandes, Ryan wants to spend time with her mother, but at the same time, it really shows to me that Maria isn't really neglectful, to the point that with the Casagrandes being less neglectful than the Loud family, you can instantly see onto why that people were really thrilled to witness Maria's development in this movie. It's just sad that not only that the fantasy elements in this movie didn't drag the characters down, but also its villain. I always think that this movie was worth sitting through more than the Loud House movies, judging the fact that it didn't drag the characters down. And the more you think about it, half of the Casagrandes writers wrote naughty or nice. And they're not really the ones who really made these characters likable while having family values. And truth be told, the other half of the Casagrandes writers really made the Casagrandes movie better than basically anything Loud House movie related. At this point, I dragged this video out longer than it needs to be, especially my portion on Naughty or Nice, to well, you can see the bigger picture that the antagonists and villains really fail in this show, even if some of them aren't as terrible, but the biggest flaw is with them being less memorable. These antagonists and villains really don't make this show better, while some do, with missed opportunities and wasted potential. It always makes me think that no matter how you see it, Loud House is really incapable of making memorable antagonists and villains, with some making a great impression due to taking the nature of the show seriously, while some focusing on other characters rather than the main character. This made me think a lot more than it should. Even if you may agree with me or not, when this show fails at making antagonists and villains, when it comes to them failing to make an impression like Lincoln and the other characters, it really shows to me that they could have done a lot more in order to have them make an impression. This video took out a lot out of me thinking about the antagonists and villains, to the point that with that being a contributing factor onto why the Loud House franchise can't be able to carry on its own by making their own characters work in movie form, I literally had to connect the dots in order to make this work. So, if you guys think that this video is a showcase of how terrible the Loud House is, you honestly don't even know that people barely talk about the villains and antagonists, and I really need to jump in order to address of how this affected me, then basically the same complaints from people in the fandom that just can't be able to find something different. I always think that there are so many things wrong with this show, but at the same time, those complaints are literally the same thing, to the point that it's actually becoming regression on having people critiquing it with the same problems while ignoring the other problems. And these problems affected me more and more, to the point that those are reason onto why I never took the fandom or hateum seriously on giving up this show, because say all you want, but separating that from this show shouldn't be this difficult. Like, it shouldn't be this difficult. And while yes, that option was my original take on doing the video rather than this, but since that people voted this over that, it made me believe that they wanted to see something different rather than witnessing the same thing that they've heard in the past by multiple people. But before I get into that, all I can say is that if you still enjoy the Loud House antagonists and villains, if you remember them, I'm not gonna stop you. You can make your Duke stories involving Morag, you can have Bad Santa being rewritten better, and you can easily have a dynamic between Lincoln and Fifi. Well, it's convincing that whole manipulation really works towards Lincoln, and Lincoln being in the position far more better than his position of Bad Santa gaslighting him. But no matter what, you can't convince me that watching these movies in a different perspective would make me appreciate them more, because at this point, Naughty or Nice crossed the line with its Loud House villains and even antagonists, to the point that Christmas Magic, the database, Duncan, and Santa really drag Lincoln down, regardless of him causing the conflict, to the point that when it's too extreme, honestly, I don't regret writing him the way that I did in Lincoln's Christmas Panic Attack. Hopefully this will be the last time I'll ever talk about Naughty or Nice, unless if I do continuation from my fanfic, but it will be focusing on other elements other than Christmas. And truth be told, this is going to be a lot more difficult to see what they're going to do in the following Loud Test movie if they include fantasy elements and a villain that would drag Lincoln's character down again. Just hopefully not in the same extremes as what this movie did. But now it's time to take you back on my community post where you voted the Loud Test villains as the top pick, while the other had fandom and hatedom, which I made the choice of making the second option having everything going on involving the Loud House to the point that it got me so stressed that there was literally no good whatsoever. But due to me changing my mind multiple times, I've decided to cut the toxicity, disturbing, and the mentality of basically everything that we've witnessed when it comes to Loud House material. If I had to tackle literally everything that is different from each other, it would have been unfocused. So the next time I'm gonna be doing the poll, it would be either two things, one of which is gonna be shipping, because I've been thinking about this for a while, especially after 4 years being into the Loud House fandom. While I had different takes on some of the shipping, really, this was bound to happen after how Naughty or Nice really gave me a different perspective on the Loud House, to the point that looking into these types of ships, really, it's difficult to avoid them, and yet at the same time, when it comes to the regular ships that have the characters be the same age, it's also a lose-lose situation. And believe me, I am going to tackle literally the shippings of not only Lincoln, but also Leni, Lowy, Luna, and the other characters. And of course, the infamous. At this point, let's just enjoy the rest of the Christmas season with my Christmas reviews, and the poll of the following Loud House video will happen eventually later this month. I'm Lonely Fanboy 48 here, and I'll see you guys with more Christmas reviews.
To you,